Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Thousands of Palestinians return home to Gaza after 15 months of war. Chinese AI startup DeepSeek threatens to topple America's dominance in the world of tech. Deportation in exchange for hefty tariffs. Colombia accepts repatriated citizens to escape President Trump's 25% tax on goods. And 80 years since Auschwitz, world leaders and survivors mark the liberation of the Nazi death camp. To the US and Colombia have pulled back from the brink of a trade war after Bogota agreed to allow US military flights carrying deported migrants to land. US President Donald Trump had threatened to impose tariffs on Colombia after it initially refused to accept the flights. The White House is hailing Colombia's U-turn as a victory for President Trump's hardline approach to immigration. Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
Migrants are still heading for the US border, despite Donald Trump's hardline immigration policies.
We should be given an opportunity to enter. We come here to work, not to do crime, nor to prank, but to work. I have a family going through a hard time because of the Venezuelan government.
It was the Colombian government in Trump's crosshairs on Sunday when President Gustavo Petro barred 2 military planes carrying Colombians deported from the US from landing. A social media spat erupted, with President Trump threatening to impose tariffs on Colombian exports to the US. But late on Sunday, the White House said Colombia had agreed to accept the migrants and Washington would not impose its threatened penalties.
Colombia's government has gotten over its impasse with the government of the United States.
As Colombia backed down, the White House claimed a victory for the Trump administration's uncompromising immigration policies, saying, "Today's events make clear to the world that America is respected again."
Trump can do this in order to pressure Colombia and also as a message to other countries, particularly to Mexico, because with Mexico he will impose measures regarding migration, and he's saying, listen Mexico, because this is what's going on in Colombia.
For now, migrants in Mexico continue to make the journey north. But the clash with Colombia, arguably Washington's closest ally in Latin America, shows how far President Trump is prepared to go to implement his campaign promises and to demonstrate to other countries the price of resisting migrant repatriations. Kate Fisher, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. The US and Iran have not exchanged any messages since US President Donald Trump returned to the White House. That's according to Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister, who said that Tehran will act according to the policies implemented by the US. In his first term, Trump pursued a policy of maximum pressure, withdrawing the US from the nuclear deal in return for sanctions relief. The European Union will lift some sanctions against Syria as part of a broader move to bring stability to the war-torn country. The French Foreign Minister says some curbs on the energy, transport and financial sectors will be removed. The latest development follows Syria turning over a new leaf after the abrupt fall of the Assad dynasty. Rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo say they have taken the key city of Goma. The DRC has cut diplomatic ties with Rwanda, accusing it of fueling the rebellion. It follows the deaths of 13 soldiers with the UN peacekeeping forces during clashes with the rebels. And Japan's Osaka has banned public smoking ahead of the World Expo. Violators of the new rule will face a $7 fine. Local regulations already ban smoking while walking in most places in Japan, but lack strict national laws. Around 160 countries and regions are expected to participate in the global events. Now, the CIA has offered a new assessment of the origin of the COVID outbreak, saying the coronavirus is more likely to have leaked from a Chinese lab than to have come from animals. But the intelligence agency cautioned it had low confidence in this determination. Laura Westbrook has more.
The CIA now believes the virus responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic more likely originated from a laboratory and points the finger at China. But the agency's assessment says it's based on low confidence. That means that the intelligence supporting it is deficient, inconclusive or contradictory. The CIA said it continues to assess that both research-related and natural origin scenarios of the COVID-19 pandemic remain plausible. Now, this new assessment was not based on new intelligence, but a closer look on conditions in high-security labs in Wuhan province, and was reportedly ordered in the last few weeks of the Biden administration. Lawmakers have been putting pressure on America's spy agencies for more information about the origins of the virus, which led to lockdowns, economic upheaval, and millions of deaths. The decision to release a new assessment is one of the first by the new CIA director, John Radcliffe. He was appointed by US President Donald Trump. He has long favored the lab leak theory, claiming COVID most likely came from a leak at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is a 40-minute drive to where the first cluster of infections reportedly emerged. He told Breitbart News he wanted the CIA to abandon its neutral stance on the origins of the virus and get off the sidelines. Beijing, meanwhile, has dismissed the CIA report, saying it has no credibility and it opposes the politicization of the source of the virus. It has also said in a statement for people to respect science and stay away from conspiracy theories. There is no consensus on the cause of the COVID pandemic. Earlier reports on the origins of COVID-19 have split over whether the coronavirus emerged from a Chinese lab, potentially by mistake, or whether it arose naturally. This new assessment is not likely to settle that debate.
Laura Westbrook in Hong Kong, thank you very much. World leaders are gathering in Poland to mark 80 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp. The discovery of a Nazi camp towards the end of World War II remains one of the most powerful symbols of the horrors of the Holocaust. From Berlin, Trent Murray reports.
Remembering one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century.
I was very, very ill. I was unconscious. I was lying on this middle blank bed with the dead or almost dead next to me.
92-year-old Eva Sespezi was just a young girl when Auschwitz-Birkenau was discovered and liberated by Soviet forces 80 years ago today. On the brink of death, she remembers the moment a Russian soldier found her inside the camp.
They thought I was already dead because I was lying with the dead. It became quiet afterwards. There was no one there to give us anything. No food, no drink. I had a high fever. A Russian soldier bent over me and smiled at me, and it was a wonderful feeling. I opened my eyes and felt hope inside me. I felt free. Something happened, a second birth. There was a feeling, a good feeling.
Extermination was the fate of all who were not fit to be active beasts of burden for the Reich.
Eva was one of the fortunate ones to survive the Nazi death camp. Of the more than 6 million Jewish people to be murdered during the Holocaust, 1 million were murdered at Auschwitz-Birkenau alone. When Soviet forces first arrived after the Germans retreated, the raw horror of the Holocaust was made clear for the world to see. Survivors, now frail and in their advanced years, returning to mark 8 decades since that gruesome discovery, alongside world leaders joining to remember what happened here.
Polska.
Poland takes care of those sites in order to protect the memory, in order to keep it alive, so people always remember. And so, through this remembrance, the world never again lets such a dramatic human catastrophe happen. And to be more precise, a catastrophe of humanity.
Here in Berlin, a permanent reminder of the horrors of the Holocaust lies right in the heart of the city at this memorial. For Germans and Europeans more broadly, it's a potent symbol for ensuring that the next generation never forgets the horrors of the past and says never again in the future. And as world leaders arrive at Auschwitz for remembrance ceremonies, survivors like Eva says it's important to remember that such hatred often manifests itself in small ways at the start.
Die Shoah hat nicht mit Auschwitz angefangen.
The Holocaust did not begin with Auschwitz, but with words, silence, and society looking away. And every single person should do something to ensure that something like this never happens again.
A message it's hoped will be carried forward across many cultures and generations. Trent Murray for Al Arabiya News, Berlin.
Returning to our top story now, and thousands of Palestinians are returning to their homes in North Gaza today after Israel opened up the Netzarim corridor. It follows the second weekend of hostage and prisoner exchanges between Israel and Hamas. Palestinians were due to return on Saturday, but experienced a delay over the release of Israeli hostage Arbal Yahoud, who will now be freed on Thursday, with 3 more Israelis expected for release on Saturday. Israel says 8 hostages due to be released in the coming weeks are dead. Let's go live to Leigh now, and that is in the north of Tel Aviv, to speak to Jotam Confino from the Daily Telegraph. Jotam, thank you so much for joining me this evening. 26 hostages were due to be released. That number is now 18. What more do we know about these 8 hostages who are dead?
So it was actually 33 altogether in the first phase, but as you mentioned, we have already seen 7 hostages being released, and we're due to see another 3 on Thursday, and then 3 more on Saturday. But Israel has now been notified by Hamas that 8 of those 33 hostages, they're dead. It's actually something that Israel estimated themselves. Hamas has not identified who they are, so the families don't know if their loved ones are among the dead. And I suspect that this is part of the psychological game that Hamas is playing, because clearly they know who's dead, but they're choosing not to announce the names or reveal the names, because they know that it brings a lot of psychological and emotional pain to the families who are waiting to see if their loved ones are going to come out.
Moving pictures have emerged of thousands of Palestinians returning home to Northern Gaza after months of displacement. But what reality actually awaits them?
Well, they're coming back to rubble. Most of Northern Gaza is affected somehow by the fighting between Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Israel. Many of the houses are completely destroyed. Entire areas are completely in rubble. So many of them will not come back to a home. And that's the question, really. What are they going to do when they come back to Northern Gaza? Because it will take a while before the international organizations can rebuild tents or areas where they can actually shelter until they start rebuilding actual homes. It's a really dire situation for them, obviously, because as you see on those images coming out of Northern Gaza, it was an active war zone for 15 months. It was where some of the heaviest fighting between Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Israel took place.
Israel initially blocked the return of Palestinian civilians to the north of Gaza unless Hamas agreed to release the hostage Abd al-Yahud. Can you tell us what agreement was reached here and how fragile is the ceasefire?
It's incredibly shaky, the ceasefire. We really have to take it day by day. What happened really was that Hamas, according to the ceasefire agreement with Israel, was supposed to release civilian hostages first. They did that on the first day when they released three civilian women. But the week after, they released 4 Israeli soldiers instead of Yehud Arbel, for example, who's a civilian woman. And that caused Israel to say to Hamas, if you're playing games, then we will also have consequences for you. We will not allow the Palestinians to return to Northern Gaza, which is also part of the ceasefire agreement. Eventually, Hamas realized, I think, that having so many Palestinians waiting and sleeping outside, waiting to cross into Northern Gaza was not sustainable. So they eventually agreed to release Yehud Arbel on Thursday, along with 2 other hostages.
Former Israeli Security Minister Ben-Gvir has said we must return to war and destroy, as he criticized Israel for allowing Palestinians to return home. We know he has resigned, but how much sway does he still have? Does his words still carry some sort of authority?
Look, politicians' words always carry some weight, and Ben-Gvir is an increasingly popular figure in Israel. He went from being a complete nobody to actually having a solid voter base now. I don't think that his words will really affect Benjamin Netanyahu, because he knows that his government, for now at least, is stable even without Itamar Ben-Gvir. But of course, you never know with politics in Israel, and therefore I'm sure that he's also listening to him. But Ben-Gvir is currently out of the picture, and he's speaking to his voter base and hoping that they will somehow listen to him.
And Israel and Lebanon have agreed to extend the deadline for Israeli forces to withdraw. What more do we know about this situation?
That's also an incredibly shaky ceasefire, to put it mildly. Both Israel and Hezbollah accuse each other of having violated the ceasefire agreement hundreds of times in the past couple of months. What happened really on Sunday was that, as per the agreement, Israeli soldiers were to completely withdraw from southern Lebanon. But Israel said that the Lebanese army had not done their part according to the ceasefire. They were not in control of the areas in southern Lebanon where Hezbollah was still present. So they said, we need to stay here until we make sure that Hezbollah is not going to be on our borders. And eventually, there was an agreement between Lebanon, the United States, and Israel to basically allow Israel to stay in southern Lebanon until February the 18th. But in the meantime, there were really violent clashes between hundreds of civilians who tried to storm the areas where soldiers are still stationed. They wanted to go back to their homes. Many of them are Hezbollah supporters, and that ended up with Israel shooting at them and killing over 20 people. So that is, of course, another reason to believe that this shaky ceasefire could really escalate any moment.
Jotam Confino, correspondent at the Daily Telegraph, thank you very much for your insights. Now, Chinese artificial intelligence startup DeepSeek could shake the core of Silicon Valley and threaten America's dominance over AI technology. Earlier today, global stocks in major players like Nvidia fell 10%, with some experts predicting as much as $1 trillion drop. We can now chat to Neil Shah, who is the Vice President of Research at Counterpoint Research. Neil, thank you so much for joining joining me. First of all, explain what DeepSeek is and why it's been seen as such a rival to long-established AI technologies in the US.
Yeah, thanks for having me. DeepSeek is basically spun off of a hedge fund who was using it for building a trading platform, AI-driven trading platform. But it's spin off, and this was a side project where they built this LLM, or large language model, AI model, to run as a chatbot. And they started training that model similar to how Meta, OpenAI trained their model. But at the same time, they use a very different technique because they did not have access to the vast resources what Meta or OpenAI has in terms of the NVIDIA GPU. So they became more creative and started a technique, learned a technique of fine-tuning the model based on more regenerative feedback rather than just a supervised training. So they found a sweet spot where they could do the training more efficiently than the bigger rivals in US. And that is where they have built this model, which is very performing really well. And it has been built very efficiently with minimum infrastructure. So that has caused a lot of panic among Western players, where China, which has been stifled to get latest and greatest semiconductors to train the AI models efficiently, they could not. But now DeepSeek comes up with a novel model, with a novel technique, which is more effective and efficient and is challenging in the big players in terms of performance. So all the trillions of dollars of investments which we are seeing or which would happen in the next few years, so there's a big question mark on that.
So DeepSeek's emergence really comes as the US is restricting the sale of the advanced chip technology that powers AI to China. Have the Western markets been caught out here? Have they been sort of blindsided by DeepSeek?
Sort of yes and no, and maybe I think DeepSeek might have got lucky with its technique, because the technique which it has approached might not work because it is more novel and never tried before in a way where they have tried it. So I would say they got lucky, but their methodology did wonders for them, and they have reached a performance level at a very lower cost and a lower infrastructure resources. And that is where everyone is shocked how it could have done this. And that is where everyone is back to drawing board. How can we become more efficient without spending so much dollars in infrastructure?
Yes, indeed. President Trump has announced plans to invest heavily in AI technology. But is it too late if China has basically beaten them to it and, as you say, created a cheaper version?
I don't think so at this point, because obviously this is a great start, but at the same time, you have a good model which is trained at a lower cost, but then comes the scalability part. How can you scale this model to millions of developers, millions of enterprises which will use this as a base model, and you have to keep it updating, right? And you need to have, if you have this ChatGPT type chatbot and the app which actually DeepSeek has launched, it is #1 on the app stores, but it has stopped working for most of them because it does not have the scale or the GPU prowess to keep it going, right? So the capex might be lower, but the operating expenditure is way high, and it requires a bigger infrastructure. And this is where the US is very much well positioned, because they have access to the latest and greatest silicon, semiconductors, and the infrastructure to keep it going at scale, right?
Neil Shah, Vice President of Research and co-founder at Centrepoint Research. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Staying with business news, the UK's largest luxury car maker, Jaguar Land Rover, says it's investing $81 million to expand its bespoke paint services. The plan includes opening new facilities in the UK and Slovakia. The firm, which is owned by India's Tata Group, says it expects to more than double its bespoke paint operation due to growing demand from wealthy customers. Now, nearly 19 million Americans are expected to go on cruise vacations this year. However, travel group AAA says passenger growth is likely to cool off in 2025 following a post-pandemic boom. Let's go to sports now. Barcelona has ended their 4-match winless streak in La Liga with a 7-1 victory over Valencia. Fermin Lopez scored an impressive double and added 2 assists. Barcelona sits third in the standing with 42 points, 3 behind second-place Atletico Madrid and 7 from the leaders Real Madrid. And Postecoglou says he doesn't know if he will avoid the sack after Tottenham hit a new low with a 2-1 defeat against struggling Leicester City. Tottenham has lost 6 of their last 7 Premier League matches to increase the pressure on the under-fire manager. Tottenham now sit in 15th place, just 8 points above the relegation zone. US President Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer spoke on the phone over the weekend as they promised to meet soon. The two leaders discussed a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza, vowing to work together for security in the Middle East. The economy was also on the agenda as the two countries talked about promoting a fair bilateral economic relationship. We can now cross over live to London to speak to our correspondent, Olly Barratt. Olly, good evening to you. Can you give us some more details on what was discussed in this phone call? The weekend newspapers seem to suggest there would be difficulties ahead. So what are the main sticking points here?
Well, there are certainly potential difficulties in the US-UK relationship at the moment, but the call, we are told, was warm. That's how Downing Street described it today, and constructive as well. We got brief readouts from both sides, making it clear that they did speak about the economy. The Prime Minister apparently told President Trump about the ways in which he's cutting regulation in the UK economy to make it an attractive place to invest. They talked about the Middle East and the Gaza ceasefire there. There were a number of other issues too, but given that we're told that the call was 45 minutes long, there are quite a few topics that we're told by government sources weren't actually discussed. The government here in London today telling us that Ukraine was not on the agenda. The appointment of the incoming UK ambassador to the US, Lord Mandelson, that wasn't discussed, we were told. Downing Street today also telling us that the issues of Greenland and the US desire to have control of it wasn't discussed, and neither was discussed the Chagos Islands deal that the UK has recently agreed with Mauritius, but that some in America have some concerns about. So in some ways, it was as interesting what they didn't discuss as what they did discuss, and what we're told, as I say, was a warm 45-minute phone conversation.
Yes, indeed, Olly. But when can we expect these two leaders to meet in person? We know Donald Trump met Theresa May when he became president the first time round.
We're told that they will meet soon, but we don't have a timeline on that. Downing Street here in London today not wanting to give us a sense of exactly when it might happen. We also don't know whether it might be Keir Starmer going to Washington or President Trump coming to the UK. And we also don't know whether, if President Trump does come to the UK, it might be in the form of a state visit. That hasn't been confirmed yet either. Some speculation that perhaps Keir Starmer could be in Washington within days from now. But as I say, Downing Street at the moment and the White House not wanting to put a timeline on exactly what soon actually means.
Trump and Starmer have met before. However, they haven't actually seen each other since Trump's friend, Elon Musk, made some critical comments surrounding the UK grooming gangs. We know the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, previously called Trump a tyrant. Have either of these things affected the so-called special relationship between the US and the UK, Olly?
Well, there have absolutely been concerns here in London that perhaps the special relationship might be affected by some of those comments from Elon Musk and perhaps his influence over Donald Trump, because he has been very critical of Keir Starmer and the UK government. But it appears that the special relationship, for now at least, is holding up pretty well. And Donald Trump, before the telephone call with Keir Starmer, actually made some very complimentary comments about Keir Starmer, insisting that he thinks he's been doing a very good job, even though they have philosophical differences, as he put it. And as I say, Downing Street insisting this was a very warm call and that the two leaders have agreed to try and work together to make sure that the US-UK relationship can flourish. That's not to say that the anxiety here in London about the potential for difficulties in this relationship at some point in the future has entirely gone away.
Olly Barratt in London, thank you so much for joining me. A reminder of our top story. Thousands of Palestinians return home to Gaza after 15 months of war. Chinese AI startup DeepSeek threatens to topple America's dominance in the world of tech. Deportation in exchange for hefty tariffs. Colombia accepts repatriated citizens to escape President Trump's 25% tax on goods. And 80 years since Auschwitz, world leaders and survivors mark the liberation of the Nazi death camp. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you for joining us. Coming up next, a special interview with Professor Manolis Kellis, Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Computer Science at MIT. And don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you for joining us.
Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to this special interview on Arabiya News. I'm Joanne Soria. Artificial intelligence is changing the way we live, work, and even think. From self-driving cars to chatbots that can hold human-like conversations, AI is no longer science fiction. It's our reality. But what does this mean for the lives we're living now and for our future? Can it take over our lives, or is it simply a tool to make our lives better? To get more insights on this, I'm joined by Manolis Kellis, Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Computer Science at MIT. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Joanna, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. To start, how would you describe artificial intelligence as it is today?
Artificial intelligence has really come a long way. It used to be faking intelligence. In other words, the humans will program every type of behavior and just simply pull the right behavior based on the circumstance, making the system seem intelligent when the system was not actually understanding anything. This changed dramatically with generative AI, with foundation models, with deep learning, and with multimodal understanding of the world. And I would say that AI has really come an enormous amount in terms of its progress. And it is surpassing human capabilities in many, many tasks already. Tasks that we once thought as intelligent have been completely wiped out by AI, pushing the boundary of what we call intelligent to more and more human-specific tasks. And therefore, the definition of artificial intelligence has changed to match the growing capabilities of these computer neuronal systems. And I would say that today, artificial intelligence has met every standard that we have set in the past and surpassed it. So we have narrowed down the definition to things that are more inherently human. But the challenge with this changing definition is that those things are also found in some of our animal relatives. For example, the emotional warmth, the care, the family values, and so on, are found in many of our animal relatives, thereby diminishing the uniqueness, if you wish, of human capabilities to this general ability to reason in a multimodal way, this common sense, this grounding, which I would say is really the last frontier of artificial and general intelligence at this point.
Should we worry that reliance on AI, artificial intelligence, might diminish human interaction?
I would say on the contrary. Right now, humans are spending an enormous amount dealing with mundane tasks, dealing with paperwork, dealing with minutes from meetings, dealing with, filling out tasks that are quite mundane. By having AI agents and avatars being able to take care of those tasks, of the more professional, the more mundane, the more, systematic and brutal and repetitive, you can now free up human creativity for more challenging tasks that really require this general intelligence that we still are unique in having. But at the same time, it can free up people to spend perhaps a little bit more time with their families, a little bit more time taking care of the elderly, taking care of their children, spending time with their loved ones. So I think that by automating a lot of the needs of our time at our work and in other sort of more mundane tasks, we can actually free up more of our time for more human interactions. And therefore, it can be a net positive thing. Now, the question is, when I meet with my students, what matters more? Does it matter more that I give them solid advice about their own work and their research? Or does it matter more that it's the physical me? Because if I train an avatar based on thousands of hours of interactions with my own students, and it is able to give very good advice that can sort of untangle them in their own research based on whatever problems at hand, based on my own thinking and philosophy about how we do research, and my own advice that I've given to many other students before, and it's able to pull this advice selectively for the problem at hand, then one could argue that I'm limiting human interaction, but one could argue also that I can be available for hundreds of students instead of the small number that any one professor can supervise at a time. So it's a trade-off.
So would you say AI has the potential to enhance human values, or could it risk eroding them?
This is also a very, very interesting question. Basically, I believe that AI can help us overcome some of the evolutionary impulses that we have. Humans have evolved from our relatives that are still around us. Like basically, we share many common principles with all of the animal kingdom. These principles are of survival, of nutrition, of reproduction, of protection of our kin. And these can manifest in beautiful ways, but these can also manifest in wars and brutality and killing and aggression and jealousy and all kinds of these values that as humans we are constantly trying to overcome. So this evolutionary origin of humans and these evolutionary principles that have led to the survival of our species are unfortunately ingrained inside us. And they are unfortunately limiting our behavior to some more impulses and urges that sometimes we're not very proud of. And the growth of our neocortex, the frontal cortex, that is able to sort of be a more reasoning part of our brain and control the limbic system, the subcortical parts of our brain, is something that we have been valuing and rewarding through the Renaissance, through these human values of altruism, of taking care of not just our immediate kin, but appreciating all humans, regardless of their religion, their country of origin, their political affiliations, and so on and so forth. So I believe that AI can continue this move towards the more intellectual, towards the more pure values that we value as humans. And the question is, will the AI feel it, or will it just pretend? And my answer to that, it might not matter. Do you prefer a doctor who will do absolutely the right thing and pretend to be empathetic? Or do you prefer a doctor who is more empathetic, but sometimes will make mistakes and do the wrong thing? And similarly for a professor, or you could even say for a parent. Does it matter if your parent absolutely loves you, if they're never there and they're never able to provide any of your needs? And does it matter if the parent doesn't really love you, but does everything as if they are the best parent in the world, and is able to fake this empathy and this warmth that every child needs? So if AI is able to meet all of these needs and is able to sort of help us achieve a higher standard for ourselves, for what it means to be warm and empathetic and generous and altruistic and caring for all human beings, then I believe AI can truly lift humanity past these more animal-like urges of competition and aggressivity towards the more humane values of warmth, empathy, and generosity.
So you touched on this a bit in your previous answer. In your opinion, what is the impact of AI on our collective evolution as a species?
So I would say that there has been a continuity in the evolution of humanity. If you look at nearly every metric of poverty, of crime, of nutrition, of health, of lifespan, of health span, of child survival rate, every single one of these metrics has been improving throughout the world. We still have a lot of work to do. There are still many places in the world where a child is not guaranteed to have an education, is not guaranteed to have, shelter, sufficient healthy nutrition, a future, a long lifespan. And we still have a lot of work to do. But if you compare to any previous time in the history of humanity, things have been getting better for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think that this move towards a wealthier, healthier, calmer future is getting closer. And I think that these capabilities of AI can help us overcome many of the challenges that we're facing today. Many of these challenges are due to scarce resources. They're due to limited wealth. They're due to limited time. They're due to limited capabilities. And I think if every child grows up with an AI assistant, a tutor that is able to guide them intellectually, emotionally, strategically, making the right decisions, being always kind, always patient, always generous, always guiding them and nudging them in the right direction, I think that this can transform education. Instead of having every teacher be required to know all of the human knowledge that every student in their classroom will need, which is nearly impossible, because some of those students might be geniuses, might be able to surpass their teachers tenfold, 100-fold, and therefore limiting what the student learns to whatever the teacher knows limits the maximum capability of the students. If instead you empower the most caring and empathetic and warm teacher, the most curious, the teachers who are willing to sit alongside the students and learn with them. And instead of the student asking the teacher the question and the teacher saying, oh, that's outside the course, or, oh, we're not going to cover that now, or, oh, this question is not something that we should address. Instead, if the teacher says, wow, that's a great question, let's sit down together and learn about it. And if the teacher has the same curiosity, then that opens the realm of teachers to not just the people who have the most knowledge, but to the people who are willing to sit along with the students and learn with them. And then suddenly we can have many, many more teachers. And we can augment these teachers with AI tutors who can help the students learn and surpass their own teachers. So as I'm sitting and learning with my children, this is exactly the attitude that I have. Where I'm like, well, here's what I know about this, but let's find out a lot more. And there's countless resources on YouTube, with videos online, on Wikipedia, with articles, and of course with ChatGPT and all of these other AI avatars that are able to respond to very detailed questions. Hey, this and that don't make sense together. Why? And you're not going to find an article already written on the internet for that. But having an AI tutor, an AI chatbot, an AI avatar, an AI agent who's able to interact with both the teacher and the parent and the student, I think will basically lift us across the world. So I think that there's, of course, a lot of misery. There's a lot of challenge. There's a lot of struggles. There's a lot of war and tension in the world today. But some of that can be alleviated by lifting everybody up, by teaching from an early age kindness and generosity and altruism, but also pushing for excellence, bringing the best out of every student, helping every student achieve their maximum potential. I think it's something that I'm really, really looking forward to.
So how do you see AI affecting our personal lives? So whether at work, for example, or even our own relationships?
I see it changing every aspect of our lives, at work, at home, with our children, with our parents, with the elderly. Imagine if every elderly person sitting in a nursing home had an AI avatar with face and, emotional reactions and voice and kindness and warmth to sit with them and chat every day. Imagine if we have every child similarly in their home, in their room, having an AI agent that is able to say, listen, you have 5 minutes to play that video game, but after that, let's get back to your homework, okay? And, encouraging them and nudging them again in the right direction. There's, of course, a lot of sci-fi movies that are painting the worst possible scenarios with AI, where AI is like invading every aspect of our privacy and controlling us and manipulating us for its own benefit. But this is a lot of anthropomorphizing of AI. This is projecting a lot of our evolutionary quirks that got us where we are. These, egocentricity and this, self-preservation and this competition and this sort of protection of kin at the detriment of others that were absolutely necessary to our own evolution and to us making it so far. But AI doesn't have to have these needs. AI doesn't have a self. AI doesn't have this evolutionary strive for survival, for domination, for ruling, and so on and so forth. And it is up to us to choose whether we want to program it into the AI or not. But it's not going to come up with it on its own if we limit the capabilities of AI systems to answer tasks that are provided by humans. Then the only thing that we need to worry about is the humans. And of course, the question is, well, won't humans use AI for malicious goals? The answer is absolutely yes. This is part of human nature. There are people who will have nefarious goals and who will use AI for either evil or for something that they think is good, but others will perceive as evil. And to that, I say, well, it comes back to the presence of any type of tool. In other words, being able to have more and more powerful computers, more and more powerful nuclear power, more and more powerful, mobility and vehicles and so on and so forth. All of that is part of the technological progress. And a knife can be extremely helpful in, everything, in using, cutting your food, in, opening boxes and all kinds of other stuff. But it can also be a very dangerous weapon in the hands of the wrong person. And a knife can kill a person, but that doesn't mean we should outlaw knives. What we should do is provide protection against people who will want to use them for harm. And it's the same thing with AI. We need to have some barriers that will prevent the AI from, carrying out malicious, tasks. And we need to also have multiple types of AI and multiple AI systems that will basically, serve as shields against each other. But I think and of course the ethical question becomes, what do you call harm? Is harm for one side of a conflict, the definition, is it up to the other side of the conflict to define what harm means? And I think that's something that, we together as a species and as a community and as a society, as a global society, I should say, should come to define these limits of someone's freedom, which, as the French would say, my freedom ends where your freedom begins. So you can't have infinite freedom for every person. You have to sort of have boundaries for any of that.
So what fields do you think have benefited the most from AI so far?
The list is countless. It's extraordinary. I think every aspect of science is extraordinarily benefiting from AI right now. So we're able to understand the language of DNA. We're able to understand the language of protein folding, of chemistry, of patient states and patient trajectories. We're able to understand medicine and healthcare interventions at a level unprecedented in the history of science. And in my daily work, we're using AI to bring together all of these different facets of biological function, of medical intervention, of disease manifestation, progression, and onset, and of treatment, again, design, production, and administration, to be able to advance human health at a level that is unprecedented. And I see AI's impact on human health and on the human condition as one of the longest lasting impacts of AI, and perhaps one of the greatest changes that our species will undergo, to be able to take care of the human body, of the human mind, of the human brain, of the human physiology, human immune system, and so on and so forth, at levels that are unprecedented and unimaginable right now. So we're able to uncover the pathways and the mechanisms underlying every aspect of human disease, understand interventions that can modulate each of these processes to restore health and sometimes surpass what we call healthy now with super health and super longevity and so on and so forth. And I think that this will be extraordinary. Beyond just medicine, health, biology, chemistry, there, manufacturing, architecture, climate, food production, animal welfare, and all of these things are areas that AI can and is truly having an enormous impact. So I think that every aspect of science, engineering, manufacturing, design is absolutely touched and reshaped by AI.
I want to talk to you a little bit about AI in education. Some students are using AI tools in an ethical manner. You did mention this earlier, to learn more, to see more information that's not available in the classroom, for example. But some have been using AI to do their own assignments or even write research papers for them. How is AI affecting education in that way and the future of graduates and even professionals in various fields?
This is an enormous concern. And one possibility is that the types of assignments that we give to students are so complex that using AI is part of the only way to solve them. Namely, being able to use critical thinking, being able to sort of reason your thoughts, being able to use this use all of these capabilities to go far beyond what any student their age would be able to do. There's another approach to education, which is goal-oriented. Namely, I'm currently working with about 40 high school students across the world, including the Middle East, where we are designing the next generation of AI systems. And those students are programming at the level of engineer with 20 years of experience. And every one of these students meets with me multiple times a week. And they work together as a team to advance the state of the art of data science and medicine and AI. And of course, I tell them, use ChatGPT for everything. And they're able to, of course, use ChatGPT, but it takes a huge amount of human reasoning to figure out what exactly I should ask the AI to help me with. And those students are 16 years old and achieving things that a 40-year-old engineer would be very proud of achieving week after week after week. So if we change education to be more goal-oriented and project-driven, where they have a goal, they have a mission, and they're doing their learning on the way to that mission, then AI becomes a friend, not a cheating tool. AI becomes a necessary ally, not the easy way out. Now, there's another aspect, of course, where they have to learn some basic foundational tools. You can teach them in the classroom with traditional approaches and an essay that they go off and read, and write at home. Or you could make the AI part of that solution. You could basically say, hey, what are the top 3 thoughts that come to mind? Bang, bang, bang. Listen, like 1 and 3 are very reasonable, but 2 is a little off topic. Can you think of a couple more? And then the student will sort of interact with AI and say, yeah, you're kind of right. What about this and that? They're like, yeah, that's good. But can you combine them perhaps in a more interesting thing? Okay, now let's structure your essay. Remember, the first thing that you need to do is come up with an outline. Can you come up with an outline? And then you do that. And then the AI becomes the tutor working with the student at home rather than the cheating tool. Oh, can you please write this essay for me? And then the student needs to submit as part of their homework the entire transcript of the interaction that they had with the AI. So that the teacher sees that it's not just, hey, can you please write this essay for me? And then suddenly you're able to augment the student experience to go beyond what was previously possible. And you have this tutoring happening throughout. And of course, there are ways to monitor the interactions of a student with the AI system. And, the parents have to sign off on this, and you have to, have certain controls on the computer, on the account, etc. But faking all of that for the student, yes, it's possible, but the act of faking it will have the end result of still learning that process of writing an essay, writing a paper, solving a challenge, and so forth. And I think that we need to also prepare students not for a world before AI. We need to prepare students for the world today. In other words, instead of asking the students to multiply 2 very large numbers, which is frankly useless, in any foreseeable future world, you ask the students to solve much more interesting questions. So I think that part of the disconnect is that we have an educational system that was designed 150 years ago with techniques that are literally from the future. And preparing the students for today's world requires the rethinking the type of education, the type of skills, the type of jobs that these students will have. And perhaps respecting them a little bit more as adults and giving them tasks that sometimes the teacher thinks are impossible, which is, I have to admit, something that I do with my high school students that I work with. I will make suggestions about things that I think will take months, and they'll come back in days and say, yeah, I tried this, and I found this new tool, and I found this new capability, and, I have it. And I am constantly blown away, not just for what a 16-year-old can achieve, but for what anyone of any age can achieve in such a small amount of time.
So how close are we, would you say, to achieving sentient AI or superintelligence? So could we see AI that possesses self-awareness, emotions, or even consciousness? And what kind of impact will this have on humans if that happens?
The question is, A, whether we want that or not. And I want to distinguish different types of AGI. I mean, like a lot of people are thinking of superintelligence as necessarily sentient intelligence. And it doesn't need to be that way. Superintelligence can simply be surpassing humans in any one task. And then for many, many tasks, we have superintelligence already. Computers are able to play chess way better than we can. They're able to play Go way better than we can. They're able to solve equations and sometimes math problems way, way better than we can. So for those tasks, I would argue that AI is already super intelligent. It surpasses the vast majority of humans. I would say 99% of humans, it can already surpass in countless tasks. So that is super intelligence. The second one is general super intelligence. In other words, being able to surpass humans in the totality of human cognitive tasks. And I would say that we're still not there. I think that the ability of humans to reason, to be grounded, to bring together information from different places, to extrapolate, sometimes from their own physical experience, to think about creative solutions that are beyond what has been done before in any realm, I think that's something that's uniquely human still. So artificial general intelligence, we're still not there. As for this sentient intelligence of having a self-awareness, having a concept of oneself, this becomes a tricky situation. First of all, I'm not sure we want that. I'm not sure we need that. I think we can achieve so much with AI just being a non-sentient, super intelligent companion. And, you know, we could agree not to push the frontiers of sentience. The second aspect, however, is, and there's a lot of philosophical debate for hundreds of years on this, what does it mean to be sentient? Does it mean that you know why you're doing something? Does it mean that you know how you're thinking and you can reason about your own thinking? Number one, in that realm, AI is already able to do that, or at least to fake that, to the level that humans can. You can ask AI, hey, why were you thinking that? And it will reason about its own reasoning, similar to how humans reason about their own reason. But now the question is it faking it? But to that I will answer, are we faking it? And there's a lot of evidence that we are faking it. There are cases of humans with a severed corpus callosum, which is the part that connects the two hemispheres of the brain. When we say about our frontal cortex or about nearly every part of our brain, of our neocortex, is actually there twice. And if you sever the connection between the two halves, each one can reason somewhat independently. And you can ask a patient by showing them, closing one eye and showing them a piece of paper that says, go get a beer in the fridge next door. And then they go and do that. But on the way back, you close the other eye and you now ask them, why did you get the beer? They will say, oh, I was thirsty. So you can think of the brain as an employee who never wants to be caught not knowing, who will make up a story to explain their own behavior. And sometimes is faking that self-awareness. How many times have I gone into a room and picked up the wrong object and come back, continue doing tasks, to only then remember, oh, no, I need this other thing. And then I go back and get that other thing. So our brain will very often make up stories that will explain our world around us and sometimes the world inside us, the actions that we're taking, without being fully on top of things. So maybe we're faking it, and maybe the AI is faking it, and maybe that's fine. And again, philosophers have argued a lot that I know I'm conscious, and you know you're conscious, but you have no idea whether I'm actually conscious or I'm just faking it. And I have no idea whether you're actually conscious or you're just faking it. And again, it goes back to this whole, what is self-awareness? And can we ever be truly self-aware? Can a particular neuron reason about its own reasoning, or can it only reason about the reasoning of other neurons? And so on and so forth. So there's a lot of philosophical dilemmas. We might not even want to get there. And in some cases, the AI can already fake reasoning. And because of all of these layers upon layers of abstraction that modern billion parameter systems are able to have, it is possible that consciousness may have actually appeared somewhere in those neurons, or at least some primitive form of consciousness. Frankly, the same way that consciousness has evolved inside our own neurons. Consciousness is not a magic thing that like sits above our head. Consciousness is somewhere in our brain. And the question is, what is the basis for human consciousness? What group of neurons is responsible for that, and what are they doing? And maybe they're faking it, just like the machines are.
So you mentioned you think that AI has already surpassed human intelligence, at least 99% of it, you said. So can it get to the point where we lose control over AI? And if that happens, what might be the consequences?
So let me be clear. I did not say that. I said that for many tasks, for many specific tasks, it has surpassed human intelligence, namely human capabilities for that one task. So I want to be very cautious there, because I didn't say that it has surpassed human intelligence. However, for many of these tasks, it is superior to our capabilities. Did humans stop playing chess? No. Chess is now more popular than it has ever been in the history of chess. More humans are playing chess than ever before. Does it bother us that we'll never surpass the machine? Not at all. So you can think of chess as one of those activities that is training the human mind for strategy, for reasoning, for long-term planning, short-term gains, making a mental model of the opponent, of what they're thinking, of how they're attacking, of being able to distribute resources, being able to sort of have multiple goals, short-term and long-term goals, being able to sort of have distractions and so on and so forth, which frankly train young children to achieve many of the things that they will need as adults. So does that change the relationship that we have with, intelligence? No, we're perfectly comfortable calling a child intelligent, even if we know that machines are way more intelligent than they are at those tasks. Now, your question is also, when AI surpasses human, perhaps general intelligence, will it want to take over? Will the Skynet of the Terminator series become self-aware and want to destroy us? And again, the question is, number one, do we want to encode this type of self-awareness? Do we want to program it to achieve self-awareness, which I'm not sure is a necessarily needed goal? And number two, will it have the same desires and impulses as we evolved species have to want to take over? And the answer is not necessarily, unless we program it to want that. So what I would say is that, yes, it's absolutely a risk that malicious goals can be achieved with the help of AI, but that there's always a human in the loop. It's possible that AI will surpass us in many, many individual tasks. It is possible that AI will also surpass us in general intelligence. And in terms of self-awareness and wanting to, eliminate and destroy humans, I would perhaps refer you to the Matrix trilogy of keeping humans around because they're kind of interesting and they can think outside the box and they can, maybe surprise us sometimes. And these syllogisms that Agent Smith has, speaking with Neo, about the machine, trying to figure out what it is that humans really want. And it comes down to that choice of, humans. But again, there's philosophical discussions about whether we truly have choices or whether those choices are in fact the result of circumstances, whether you can predict human choices in the short term, but you can't predict them in the long term, whether by the time we're consciously making a choice, our brain has already chosen and we're just executing that choice. So anyway, there's I think a lot of philosophical debates. I don't have all the answers, and I don't think any of us has all the answers about where this balance lies between humans and machines in consciousness, in the goals, in volition. Maybe the desire to take over is not necessarily a product of evolution. Maybe any sentient entity sufficiently powerful will decide that humans are a nuisance and they're not even entertaining, like Agent Smith would think. And maybe in order to answer all of the questions in the universe, the AI will need to eliminate humans first because they're standing in the way. But I can imagine a scenario where after it has conquered all of humanity or enslaved them or sort of created the matrix, the AI basically realizes that, okay, now I know every answer in the universe. I am kind of bored. I wish that humans were still around. So anyway, we're many science fiction movies away from this. And I think that in the near term, AI can be a force for good. I think that super intelligence in so many tasks is absolutely a goal of my research, a goal of many people's research. And I think it will be needed to elevate the human condition to levels that we have not previously reached. I think that it will allow us to achieve perhaps levels of empathy, of generosity, of altruism that we have never before seen, levels of education, of growth, of kindness, of taking care of the elderly and of our loved ones that, again, have never been before achieved. And I think that having an AI assistant for every working professional, having an AI tutor for every student, having an AI, co-teacher for every classroom, I think will be a net benefit for all of humanity. We still live in a world of limited resources where, energy is not infinite, food is not infinite, space is not infinite, resources are not infinite. And therefore human conflict continues and there are unfortunately still so many struggles in the world. But I believe AI can be a force for lifting everyone from, the top student in the class to achieve levels unimagined before, to every student in the class to achieve what would traditionally not have been possible in terms of career, in terms of, creativity, in terms of self-fulfillment and self-instantiation. So I'm an optimist. I think that we can truly achieve a lot with the help of AI, improve the path of humanity to levels never before seen, and that we need to be very cautious about the self-consciousness part of AI, because that's the place where some of these unexpected behaviors can sometimes arise. And I would argue that perhaps we don't need self-consciousness.
Maybe next time we can have AI avatar conducting an interview.
Let me call the real Manolis and see what he thinks about that.
Professor Manolis Kellis, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Joanna, thank you so much for the great conversation. Really enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome, of course, to the Saudi House. Today, we're going to be talking about climate change, Saudi Arabia in particular, their contributions to addressing global environmental challenges. His Excellency Adel Al-Jubeir is here with me. Your Excellency, it's wonderful to see you as always.
It was a pleasure.
I want to kick off though, by asking you about what we've seen in just the last 48 hours. U.S. President Donald Trump signing a raft of executive agreements and pledging to withdraw from the Paris Accords. In your mind, does that damage the world's ability to fight climate change?
I don't believe so. I think there are different ways of achieving the objective that we all want, and countries can pursue whatever path they believe is best for them. I think the important thing is the bottom line. The Trump administration in the first term actually did a lot to reduce carbon in the United States. So this is a very positive development. I think the important thing is that we look at these discussions as cooperative discussions, not as negotiations, because we're all trying to find the most optimum path forward to dealing with the challenges in a way that's unemotional, that's logical, that's scientific, so that we can overcome this challenge that we have. We're all in this together. There are no winners or losers. We all win or we all lose. That's the attitude that we in Saudi Arabia bring to this discussion.
Just 2 years ago here at the World Economic Forum, Al Gore described what was happening in climate as boiling oceans and rain bombs. A lot of people pushed back on that at the time privately, but they didn't necessarily feel comfortable doing so on a public stage. In your mind, how are these words changing when we describe climate?
We have a challenge that is before us with regard to climate change and with global warming. Nobody can dispute that, and the impact that it has on not only our climate, but on our politics, on conflicts, on not in dispute. I think what we need to adopt is a rational, scientifically based conversation, not grandstanding and not threatening, because it will be like the shepherds who cried wolf too many times and then nobody believed them. We know we have a problem. We know we have a challenge. So now that we know this, let's not talk about how it's going to kill all of us. Let's talk about how we extricate ourselves from this problem. We can do it by education. We can do it by more rational policies. We can do it by more efficient production of energy. We can do it by more efficient use of energy. We can do it by investing in alternative sources of energy. We can use it by combating desertification, by land restoration. We can use it by funding research to experiment with transformative technologies. And we in Saudi Arabia are doing all of this. We are setting aside 30% of our territory, land as well as sea, to be protected areas so that they're untouched. We are investing in greening. We are investing in transforming waste into energy. We are investing in solar, in hydro, we're looking seriously at nuclear power. We're investing in capturing carbon from the atmosphere. We're investing in a blue economy. We're investing in our seas and sustainable fishing. We are doing all of it because of two reasons. One, we live on this planet. We breathe the same air everybody does, and it's important for us that it's a healthy planet. And two, it's also very profitable. So there's an economic incentive to do this. And we have taken our experience and we expanded it into initiatives like the Middle East Green Initiative, which includes more than 22 countries, to teach countries how to incorporate the circular carbon economy approach so they can deal with environment and climate change issues the way we have been, so that we all benefit in our region. Because, as I said, we all win or we all lose. We are all in this together, and climate and pollution doesn't differentiate between one country and another. That's why the effort has to be regional and it has to be global.
Would you say then perhaps that the election of Donald Trump and his presidency is the great reset that the climate conversation needed?
I hope it will be, because I think everybody is concerned about environment, and everybody is concerned about climate, and it's important that all of us, individuals and nations and companies, do everything we can to deal with this challenge. But we will deal with this challenge. We have the technology, we have the financial resources. We need the political will to engage in a positive, cooperative, conversation where we all come up with the best way forward, rather than engage in an emotional, argumentative, political scoring, hypocritical conflict that serves nobody.
Speaking of hypocrisy, over the last several days in the Financial Times, there's been reporting that billions of dollars have fled out of green ETFs and green investing. In your mind, are they jumping the gun there?
I don't know why they pulled out and what investment criteria they have. I do know that in Saudi Arabia, the investments that we have made in renewable energy, in solar, in turning waste into energy, in when we're looking at nuclear, when we're looking at efficiencies, ensuring that we don't have flaring of oil and gas, that we don't have leakages, that those have been extremely profitable. We have huge investments in electric vehicles. We're looking at producing electric batteries. We're looking at storage facilities. And for us, it's been these have been very profitable investments. So we are committed to continuing to invest in this. But in terms of the withdrawal of funds, I don't know what was the reason for them investing in those funds in the first place. I don't know what the returns are, so I'm not in a position to comment on it. But what I can say is it could be a function of people getting excited, wanting to do politically the right thing, and then realizing maybe the funds should have gone somewhere else.
When you think about what Saudi Arabia is doing in this fight against climate change and to make the planet, frankly, a better place, it was interesting. His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz just a few days ago during the Future Minerals Forum in Saudi Arabia talked about exporting enriched uranium, yellow cake. That's politically dicey, if you will, as you know. In your mind, how do you explain those kinds of exports to the world?
Very simple. We are a large energy producer in the world. We want to be an exporter of energy to the world, whether that energy is oil or gas, whether that energy is solar, whether that energy is electricity, whether that energy is hydro, whether that energy is nuclear. We want to have a nuclear program in Saudi Arabia to produce energy. We have between 1% and 4%, according to estimates, of the world's uranium deposits in country. It makes a lot of sense to exploit those resources economically by mining it. It makes even more sense that once you mine it, that you engage in the processing to turn the uranium into fuel that you can sell at a higher price. So that includes all of the steps in turning uranium from dirt into energy. And it involves taking advantage of the associated industries that come with this and taking advantage of the profits that come with this. We do not want to be a country where mining companies come in, dig up the soil, remove it, do all the processing and all the refining and all the producing of energy outside. We end up with a hole and we take less than 10% of the value chain. We want to benefit jobs, associated industry, and profits. And we believe that we can do it, as does the International Atomic Energy Agency, in a way that has nothing to do with producing nuclear weapons. Our objective is energy and profit.
Tell me this, speaking of weapons, in the years past, we've often talked about how Saudi Arabia in the 70s and Russia just a few years ago was using energy as a weapon. In your mind, how vulnerable are we today in our energy systems? And I'm talking about whether it be the enormous amount of energy that AI, as we know, is going to require, whether it be just oil markets generally. How vulnerable are we today in our energy markets?
I don't believe, I wouldn't describe it as vulnerable. I would describe it as we are looking at an increase in demand that needs to be filled somehow. Because if it's not filled, then you're going to see a huge spike in prices. And AI and data centers require a lot of energy, and that energy has to come from somewhere. We in Saudi Arabia want to be a hub for these centers. We have the land. We want to be able to, we can produce that energy using renewable energy, solar energy, other energy, and we can do it efficiently. And we believe that given our geographic location, we can have the connectivity to be able to send it abroad. So this is one of the priorities for us. So I think that this is how I would look at it. In terms of oil weaponizing energy, we have maintained for many decades that oil is not a weapon. It's not
anymore.
It's not a weapon. You can't shoot it. You can't fire it. You don't take it to the battlefield. It's a commodity, and it's a precious commodity. It relies on supply and demand, sets the price. We want to be a responsible producer. We have been a swing producer where we try to keep the markets in balance as much as we can to reduce the massive fluctuations in the price of oil, so that it makes it easier for people to invest, to borrow money, and to return their investment, and also to plan long term. That provides stability for the global financial markets, which serves us because we are big investors and we are energy producers, and we want stability in the financial markets.
Yeah. Donald Trump is widely expected to visit Saudi Arabia in the near future. What kind of conversation do you want to have with him regarding energy and climate?
President Trump is most welcome in Saudi Arabia anytime he wants to come. And I think the conversations between Saudi Arabia and the United States, we have been allies, we have been partners for 80 years. We have huge interests, whether it's bilaterally in terms of trade, investment, in terms of cultural exchanges, in terms of students, in terms of whether it's regionally. We work very closely together on bringing peace and stability in a region, maintaining security in a region, whether it's globally, the same issue. We have very important relationships on technology, on energy, on investments. We are large investors in the U.S. economy. American companies are large investors in the Saudi economy. So it is a huge relationship, and it has many, many dimensions to it. And every time our two countries have worked closely together, they have been able to achieve great things, whether in terms of stability and security and peace regionally and globally, and in terms of prosperity for both countries when it comes to trade and investment issues.
There's a lot of speculation about what the U.S.-China relationship will be in the future. Saudi Arabia, of course, has a strong relationship both with the United States and, of course, with Beijing. How worried are you about the possibility that a trade war between the United States and China could derail your agenda as a country?
We have very strong relationships with both countries. Our relationship with the U.S. is a strategic relationship. China is our largest trading partner. We believe that stability in the global financial system and the global market serves everyone, and we hope that the two countries will be able to negotiate their differences, because a trade war does not serve the interests of either. And I believe that we have seen in the past that the two countries have been able to negotiate or resolve their issues and reach understandings through by discussing it rather than by turning it into trade wars.
Talk to me a little bit about the region when it comes to climate. Obviously, we see the UAE made a great deal of strides, obviously hosting COP28. In your mind, as Saudi looks forward to its own hosting of a COP, what are some of the things you're hoping that the region is able to achieve?
Our region, the Gulf region in particular, has done, I think, an outstanding job in terms of dealing with climate, the challenges of climate, as well as land degradation, as well as biodiversity. So the Rio Trio, the three COPs, we have invested tremendous resources in it, beginning with education and all the way to implementation. In Saudi Arabia, we have more than 70 initiatives domestically that deal with all of these issues. We have initiatives globally. I mentioned the Middle East Green Initiative. We established the Global Water Organization. That was an initiative by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince to bring clean water and how we use water more efficiently to as many people as possible. We are part of the Methane Pledge. We are involved with cleaning oceans, and we're involved with reversing pollution of plastics. We are involved in a lot of initiatives, and we have provided investments to many countries around the world to help them with resilience, to help them with beefing up infrastructure, to help them with desalination, to help them with on and on and on. We are doing a lot of things. We hosted COP16, the Earth COP was a land degradation and drought COP, and our objective was to raise the awareness level and highlight the link, the nexus between land degradation and security. If you have land degradation, people don't have food, they move to places where they can plant food. Chances are people live there, you have conflict, you have bloodshed, you have violence, you have extremism, you have terrorism, you have migration. The migrants end up in a country where there could be a reaction that leads to extremist politics. So when you look at extremist politics in Europe, you can trace its linkage to a particular place in Africa or in the Middle East. And you can trace the origins of that conflict to drought. You look at the countries in the Sahel, 90% of the Chad River evaporated since the 1960s. It created dislocations for millions of people who moved, created conflict, and then we're paying the price. Darfur, Sudan has been engaged in a conflict for almost 40 years. And it started with drought, and it turned into a conflict, ethnic conflict, civil war, people paying the price. And our objective is to highlight this to people, invest early in land restoration, and avoid the consequences that will cost us 50 times more to deal with than if we had dealt with it at the outset. And the irony of all of this is investing $1 in land restoration generates between $7 and $30 in profit. This is better than investing in high tech. Why don't people do it? And this is what we're trying to show people. And this is not an issue, land degradation, that concerns North Africa and the Middle East. Germany has a problem with the waters of the Rhine. Southern Europe has problems with drought. This is an issue that impacts everyone. Sweden gets dust from the Sahara Desert, as does Costa Rica. We get dust from as far away as the Chinese desert. Now, we have a lot around us. So this is a global issue, and it's straightforward to deal with. We just need to focus on it and get it done, and this is what we're trying to do in Saudi Arabia.
You may remember President Biden's Secretary of Defense, as well as the current Secretary of Defense in the United Kingdom, have cited climate change as their number one worry for the planet, their number one concern. Now that we have Trump in the White House, is climate your number one concern for the planet?
Ours?
Yeah.
I believe for everybody, the issue of climate change, the issue of whether it's too little water or too much water, the issue of rising temperatures, everybody acknowledges this.
But is it the number one concern facing us?
I think it certainly is. If it's not the number one, it is right up there, because it impacts everything. It impacts, for example, desertification, impacts the reflection of the sun, impacts weather patterns over the Atlantic, impacts the frequency and intensity of hurricanes in the Caribbean, impacts weather climates around the world. Dust can do the same thing. And also the climate issues can impact what happens in the oceans, and the oceans are our biggest reservoir for carbon. And that impacts, again, the rain patterns. And so it's a cycle that impacts everything we do, and it's linked to economic development, it's linked to wars and conflict, it's linked to prosperity. 800 million people on the planet are undernourished. The amount of land we can grow food on shrinks. Populations are rising. So we're heading towards conflict. We have to fix these issues. And I don't believe that anyone disagrees with this. I believe the differences have to do with what's the right way to move forward in tackling these issues. And I think that grandstanding and emotions and hypocrisy and threats and shaming and naming and finger pointing doesn't get us anywhere. Rolling up our sleeves and planting trees, redesigning our cities, investing in technology, investing in alternative sources of energy, pointing out the benefits and the profitability of that path is what will get people to move towards the right direction. And when we can deal with these issues, they will have a direct positive impact on security, which will then have an impact on stability and peace.
It's interesting, over the last several days leading up to his inauguration, Donald Trump talking about Greenland. I've spent a lot of time in Russia and Ukraine, as you know. And when we talk about climate and what's happening in the Arctic, the ice, surprise, surprise, is melting. That raises security concerns. Russia has the most military intelligence hardware in the Arctic, as well as oil and gas infrastructure, as you know. In your mind, are we living in dangerous times as a result of climate change?
I think we are always living in challenging times. The history, unfortunately, of mankind has been one of wars, not peace and stability. I believe that the conflicts may shift from one region or another depending on the century we live in, but war has been a constant in our history, unfortunately. I think we are moving towards a global society, a global village. I don't want to call it village, it's too big for a village, where we now recognize that something happening on one end of the world has a direct impact on something on the other end of the world, which we never had before. How long did it take to get mail from Europe to the United States 150 years ago? Now it takes a nanosecond to get pictures and voicemail and from the Amazon forest to Siberia because of technology. How long? So now we deal with the issues of that go beyond our borders, that impact all of us positively or negatively. COVID doesn't differentiate between male, female, between Muslim, Jew, Christian, between Asian, African, European. It doesn't differentiate. We are all its target. And unless we all work together to contain it, we can't. And we did work together, in spite of our differences. Maybe not ideal, but in a very effective way, to contain it and push back against it. So we are, in one hand, yes, business as usual, challenging world, you called it dangerous world, but also business as unusual, which is a recognition that we need to deal with each other to handle global issues like pandemics, like climate, like transportation, and that those issues can only be handled if we work together. So on one hand, you're seeing the world coming together much more closely than before, while at the same time we're the same in the sense of our tensions. And my hope, and I believe this is where we're heading, maybe because I'm an optimist, is that as we learn and more, as we learn of the benefits that we get by working together, the side of the side of the equation that spells cooperation grows, and the side of the equation that spells conflict gets diminished. Because where does conflict get us? Nowhere. We can have conflict for 30 years and we'll be worse off than we were when we started. Whereas if we have cooperation, technology, artificial intelligence, trade, in 30 years we can be many, many times wealthier than where we are today. Which vision do you want? Going forwards and upwards or going backwards and downwards?
Are we, as he says, safer, the world, with Donald Trump in the White House?
I don't see why people talk about this. I think, yes, the world is safer. The world is safer with anyone in the White House. The world is safer because the world is beginning to recognize that we need to work together. We need to deal with challenges that are beyond us as nations or as ethnic groups or as religious groups, and that we have to deal with problems or challenges or dangers as humanity, that we can't escape that. And I believe that we are beginning to do this, and we will continue to do more of this. And so I'm hopeful that our children and grandchildren will be living in a world that is more together and more calm and more prosperous and more healthy than the one we live in.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, under the terms of the ceasefire agreement, tens of thousands of displaced residents of Northern Gaza start returning home. But in many cases, they're returning to rubble and apocalyptic scenes of devastation. Egypt, Jordan, the EU and the Arab League express firm opposition to suggestions by President Trump that Palestinians from Gaza be expelled and resettled in neighbouring countries. And Lindsey Graham, a key Republican ally of President Trump, expresses concerns about pardons being issued to the January 6th rioters who attacked police officers. Coming up, we'll be speaking to two people with starkly different views, both pardoned by the president. Hello and welcome to the programme. We begin in Gaza, where hundreds of thousands of people are reported to have been making their way home on foot. This after a deal was reached between Israel and Hamas for the release of another 6 hostages. Well, this part of the deal had been stalled after Israel accused Hamas of violating the terms of the truce. Well, the majority of Gaza's 2 million residents have been displaced during these past 15 months of war, which has reduced much of Gaza to rubble. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Shayna Lowe, spokesperson for the Norwegian Refugee Council, who joins us from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on Arabiya News, Shayna. We're being told that 200,000 displaced people have returned on foot to the north of Gaza during the course of the last few hours. What sort of things, what sort of a scene are they finding on arrival, Shana?
Well, I just spoke, Tom, about an hour ago to one of our colleagues who remained in Gaza City throughout the last 15 months and asked her to describe the scene. And she told me it's raining people and that she had a hard time crossing the street because it was so crowded. So she told me that it was scenes of happiness. Of course, people are devastated to see the amount of destruction. There's tremendous rubble and destruction throughout all of northern Gaza, Gaza City, and the North Gaza Governorate. But people are relieved to be coming home. They plan to set up shelters on the rubble of their old homes, but they're happy to be back on their property, at their homes. And I think today was really a day full of both joyous reunions and also grief of understanding just how much was lost and how many people have been lost over the last 15 months.
Yeah, I mean, the scenes we've been seeing make it look like it's an earthquake zone, and clearly a massive reconstruction effort is going to be needed. But until that happens, I mean, where and how are people going to live there?
Well, first of all, we need to get temporary shelter solutions into Gaza. Right now, the only aid that's able to reach the northern part of Gaza is coming via Jordan and the Jordan corridor. So for many humanitarian agencies that had focused on bringing in aid via Egypt and Kerem Shalom, we're having to work to reroute our aid and make sure that we're getting aid there. There are some immediate concerns around the safety of people. One, around explosive remnants of war, unexploded ordnances, and the fact that people may be returning to places where there are risks of being killed due to bombing, basically the leftovers of bombs. And we've already heard a couple of instances where people have been killed. So we need to be working on education and making sure that when people return home, they know how to do so safely. There are also concerns around buildings that may still be standing that are damaged but are actually structurally unsound. So we're going to have to be conducting assessments, setting up temporary shelters for people who are returning to their properties, making sure that they have tents and the materials that they need to build temporary shelters until the rubble is removed, safely removed, and reconstruction can start in full.
Yeah, we're reading reports about some areas with 75% destruction to homes and infrastructure, more than 75% in some cases. I'm just wondering if it's very much like that across the board, or whether there are some areas of the north of Gaza that are much worse affected than others.
Well, all throughout Gaza, an estimated 90% of housing units are damaged or destroyed. And of course, that's varying degrees of damage. It could be entire walls missing or a window broken. But there's a tremendous amount of rebuilding that needs to be done. In terms of the most severe areas, by far, that's the North Gaza Governorate. And we've heard reports of people who have returned up to North Gaza and on foot last week when the ceasefire first took hold, who left Gaza City and returned to their homes and found that there was so little there that they decided to come back to Gaza City. We ourselves had a staff member who had went to return to her home and saw the level of destruction. And also the level of infrastructure destruction that's been destroyed in that area makes it very difficult for aid trucks to even reach those places and find the thousands of people who remained over the 100+ day siege that Israel imposed on the northernmost governorate of Gaza and deliver essentials, because the roads are impassable and reconstruction needs to be done to ensure that trucks can actually make their way there.
I'm just trying to imagine what the immediate needs are, but I'm assuming it's things like fuel, food, medicine. I mean, what are the main needs at this particular moment in those worst affected areas?
Well, I think we have to be recognized that just because the bombs have stopped falling does not mean that the emergency or the crisis has ended. It just means that we finally have an operating environment where we can scale up and surge our supplies. And so the basic essentials are still what's needed: food, water, medicine, essential shelter items, and of course fuel, because that's needed to, one, power the trucks, the machinery to remove the rubble, the bakeries. And that's one of the most important things, which has really struggled to get up to the northern parts of Gaza. We've heard of one convoy that's made it there since the ceasefire went into effect, and we're continuing to push to allow more fuel trucks to enter North Gaza and Gaza City directly to be able to power those bakeries, those generators at hospitals, and the machinery that's needed to fuel the response.
So how would you describe the humanitarian situation in the north of Gaza? What sort of words could one use?
I mean, it's a hellscape. It's the amount of destruction is just unimaginable. I mean, we see the images, but we think about that in terms of not only the structures themselves, but also the memories that have been lost, the people who are still buried under the rubble. It's going to take not weeks, months, but years in order for us to be able to really remove all of this rubble, ensure that the UN itself has estimated that it will take 14 years just to demine all of Gaza at this point and remove all of the explosive remnants of war. And so it's a level of destruction unlike we've ever seen in the occupied Palestinian territory. And for sure, this is a years-long recovery and reconstruction process.
But in terms of managing the crisis, is it easier for an NGO like yours or for other aid organizations to manage the crisis when people are in camps? Because obviously they're then more concentrated. Distribution presumably is easier, isn't it, when people are all in the same place than when they're scattered more broadly?
I think it's hard to know which is preferable, because also we have to remember that the camps and the informal sites that displaced Palestinians have been living in are incredibly overcrowded. There's challenges in getting aid to those areas because of how tightly packed they were, difficulty in installing sanitation facilities. And so in some ways, having people more spread out gives people a little bit more space, a little bit more dignity. Of course, we'll have to, one of the challenges, as we've witnessed, as you said, 200,000 people moving today alone. And with this mass movement, it means that as humanitarian agencies, we need to be really agile in terms of identifying needs and ensuring that we're meeting people where they are and providing what they need where they are. And I think in terms of people's psychological well-being, of course, being back where their homes were, even if their homes are not standing, is a relief. Being back with other members of their community is something that's going to tie people together and in some ways hopefully mitigate some of the internal tensions that of course you get with lots of people living in a very enclosed small space with limited resources.
Yeah, you mentioned people's mental well-being. Clearly a lot of people must be really traumatized. I mean, I'm thinking particularly about children, having seen 15 months of deadly violence right under their noses.
Yeah, we have been working in Gaza for 15 years, providing psychosocial support to students. And of course, there have been multiple escalations in those 15 years, but we've never seen anything as devastating as this in terms of how widespread the devastation and destruction is and the amount of grief and trauma. We have an entire society that is traumatized, and we need to ensure that our response is trauma informed and that we're not just providing the basic essentials of food, water, and medicine, but we're providing Palestinians with the tools and the psychosocial support that they need in order to restart their lives.
Just talking about some of the more vulnerable people who've been living in camps for much of the last 15 months. Is it advisable for some people, I'm thinking about elderly people, people who might be disabled in one way or another, to stay in the camps where perhaps they have more immediate access to the support they need?
That certainly is something that we're looking at. We sent out some of our teams this week to go and look at the sites and look at the people who are most vulnerable or might have difficulty moving as everyone else is moving. Of course, most people are returning to Gaza, to northern Gaza on foot. And so for people who have disabilities or elderly or maybe even have small children, that can be quite difficult. And so we're assessing to see how those people can be met. But I think it's also important to remember that so much of Palestinian society is based around the extended family unit, based around community. And so we want to make sure that those people are not, if they are left behind, at least for now, that they aren't isolated and that they're given the support that they need.
We were just talking about the scale of the damage a little earlier on. According to some satellite images, it appears that 2/3, maybe 70%, as we were saying, of the territory has been severely damaged. And I'm just wondering, for people who return to their homes, we've been talking about how people are happy to be back home, even if it's the site of a former home. Some are suggesting perhaps they might not want to stay there for all that much longer, and the idea of being resettled somewhere else might gain appeal as time goes by. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we all saw the announcement this weekend from President Trump saying that he felt that some other Arab countries should take Palestinians in. We already have a 75-year-long refugee crisis, and we need to ensure that Palestinians are not being forcibly displaced or displaced, which is in violation of international law and their right, in order to under the guise of humanitarian relief or what's best for them. Palestinians themselves know what is best for them, and they should be the ones to determine what their future looks like. And we need to support them wherever they are in determining what that future is.
And of course, you're in the Jordanian capital, Amman, and Jordan is one of the countries that President Trump has suggested people from Gaza be resettled in. I mean, how did those comments go down in Jordan, do you think?
I think that they were pretty unacceptable. Jordan already hosts an enormous Palestinian refugee population of Palestinians that were displaced both in 1948 and again in 1967. And while the Jordanian government has been extremely generous and accommodating to Palestinians living in Jordan and also providing humanitarian relief to those in Gaza, I don't think that they have an interest in hosting more refugees. They also have hosted refugees from Iraq and Syria as well. And so I think it's a non-starter here.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Shayna Lowe, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Now, the US President Donald Trump has suggested that Egypt and Jordan could take in Palestinians from Gaza. Well, during the course of the weekend, the president told reporters that it was, quote, time to clean out Gaza. Well, both Hamas and the Palestinians have condemned that proposal, and Jordan and Egypt have flatly rejected the idea. Well, Jordan is currently home to more than 2 million Palestinian refugees, whilst tens of thousands of others live in Egypt. Well, for more, we can speak now to Fred Fleight, who's the Chief of Staff and Executive Secretary of the National Security Council during the first Trump administration, who joins us now from Washington. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'd just like to start by asking you, I mean, how widely shared is the view in Washington that Palestinians should leave Gaza and be resettled in other countries?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I think the question is, do Americans think that Donald Trump is serious about this? And I believe he is. We're seeing him taking on international problems with unconventional approaches that have not been heard before. And I would say that to look at this proposal, the most important thing is to recognize that Donald Trump is rejecting the idea of the two-state solution and letting the Palestinians rule Gaza for the foreseeable future until they're de-radicalized. I think this is an opening position that Trump feels very strongly about. It is basically throwing out the position of the Biden administration, which kept pushing a two-state solution over the objections of the Israeli government. So I think Trump is reframing this, and I wouldn't underestimate him.
Some of the unconventional methods adopted by Donald Trump are viewed as being negotiating tactics by some analysts. Could this be a negotiating tactic?
I'm not going to say that. I'm simply going to say that he is a deal maker. He's serious, and he's been delivering on the things that he's been promising. And he has a very competent national security team with him, with Michael Waltz as national security advisor, Marco Rubio. He now has multiple envoys who are working in the Middle East. Trump is very dedicated to bringing stability to the Middle East and standing by our friends and allies.
Speaking of friends and allies, Jordan and Egypt are two friends and allies of the United States. We heard the president on Air Force One saying you're talking about probably 1.5 million people. We just clean out that whole thing. Obviously, that went down very well with Israel's far right, and we can talk about that in a minute. But how do you think it went down with Washington's other allies in the region, notably the two countries most concerned by that idea, Egypt and Jordan?
Well, look, Egypt and Jordan have always taken a position that they don't want to take Palestinian refugees, and that was an expected response by both nations. But I also think Egypt and Jordan and other nations are looking at Trump, and they're seeing him achieving things that didn't appear to be possible just a few years ago. So we will see what happens. Trump has a very aggressive peace effort plan for the Ukraine war. He's talked about buying Greenland, ending Chinese domination over the Panama Canal. So this is part of an approach of breaking the norms of American foreign policy and seeing what's possible.
The Arab League is a dominant and important voice in this region. They said that such a move, resettling Palestinians elsewhere, would be tantamount to, quote, ethnic cleansing, their words, not mine. I mean, Middle Eastern allies in the United States, in the Middle East, are sounding extremely clear about this. They simply don't like this idea, firmly opposed to it.
I think if you were to put many Arab leaders in a room privately, they'd say to you, they're outraged at the genocidal attack by Hamas terrorists against Israel on October 7th, 2023. That's the mess that was caused by Hamas. Now, Trump is proposing a solution to this mess, to this instability. But if we're going to talk about ethnic cleansing and genocide, let's start with Hamas. Let's start with a terrorist group that is still holding innocent Israeli hostages almost 2 years after they launched their genocidal attack.
Donald Trump talked about Gaza as being what he called a demolition site. He said something has to happen. I mean, could we read into that perhaps the US has got some plans to help with the reconstruction of Gaza?
I don't know what else to add on what I've already told you. I think it's part of a strategy to reset the parameters of this debate, and we'll see what Steve Witkoff and other envoys have in mind.
Are you surprised by the reaction of other countries to this idea? I mean, or do you think that was to be entirely expected?
Look, I could have told you how Egypt and Jordan would respond to this, and I know why they responded to this. You and I know that Palestinian terrorists assassinated the Jordanian king's grandfather, and Jordan remembers that. Both nations have security concerns about, Palestinian terrorists and terrorist groups, not just Hamas, but also Islamic Jihad. I understand why Egypt does not want these people in their country. This is a difficult pill to swallow, and I think that this response was understandable. The problem is no one has come up with a solution for who and what will rule Gaza if a peace plan is successful. And this is Trump's opening gambit. We'll see where it goes.
We've heard quite a bit from other US allies. The Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, who was actually present at the inauguration. I think she can be considered a close ally and friend of this new administration. She's obviously not sounding too keen on this idea of resettling Palestinians from Gaza. She used the example of Syrian refugees being resettled in other countries in the region and how it had been unsettling and it had affected regional stability. I mean, do you think that's a consideration for the Trump team to bear in mind?
I think the Trump team will bear in mind every consideration, but I'll repeat to what I said earlier. There's no easy solution to what's going on in Gaza. The position of Israeli leaders, and I spoke to them a few months ago, is that before they will agree to a two-state solution, the Palestinians have to be de-radicalized. If we have a people that's training their young people from the time they're toddlers to destroy the state of Israel and to hate Jews, something has to change before that people is given an opportunity to set up a state next to Israel, which Hamas would use to rearm and attack Israel again.
So what you're saying is that the two-state solution, which has been talked about and championed as the only solution, including by some, I should add, in the Israeli government, not all of them are aligned on what the right outcome is. Are you saying that Washington's approach is that perhaps that solution is not the right solution and we're going to see something different? Is that your forecast?
I think I've already said that quite clearly. But, you know, the focus for Trump is to be working with our allies in the region, our close friends like Saudi Arabia, the other Gulf states, and Egypt, to see what can be done to expand the Abraham Accords and to create economic and political opportunities that's going to advance the interests of all these nations. There'll be a solution that he's going to pursue with the Palestinians, but the Palestinian issue should not obstruct other efforts to promote stability and the economic success of other nations in the region.
We're just under a week into this second Trump presidency, and countries like China, Mexico, Canada, Europe, all targeted in some way by some rhetoric out of Washington or threatened with tariffs. Colombia, too, is one of America's oldest allies in Latin America. Is there any sense of nervousness, do you think, in Washington, that perhaps some traditional allies might start to get a bit fed up and turn their backs on Washington?
Well, Colombia was very interesting because the Colombian president said he would not accept U.S. planes bringing dangerous illegal migrants to Colombia. When Trump threatened Colombia with tariffs, the Colombian president changed his mind and said, well, I'll send a presidential plane to take those illegal migrants back to Colombia. This was a success for Trump. It's not a big success, but it shows he can get things done. And I think that's what's dominating the news in the U.S. Not everyone agrees with Trump. They may not agree with everything he's saying, but he's doing something, and he's showing that there's a way for an American president to be successful on the global stage. And I think in the Middle East, especially Trump's relationship with Saudi Arabia, it's going to be a powerful and successful relationship.
So to sum everything up, I mean, it seems to me like you're saying that you've got some very old problems, some of them dating back several decades. Old solutions for those old problems haven't worked. Donald Trump's got some new solutions, and let's see whether or not they work. Is that sort of roughly the essence? Does that sort of sum up Donald Trump's approach to some of these old problems?
That is his approach, and it was his approach in the first term. And remember, the basis of the Abraham Accords was they offered the Palestinians the deal of the century. The Palestinians turned it down, an enormous offer, which would have sent billions of dollars of development aid into Gaza. The Palestinians, once again, turned in an opportunity for peace. Trump then went to our allies in the region and said, the Palestinians can't have a veto over proposals to stabilize and promote peace and economic security in the region. And the Trump administration found nations who agreed. We want to work with the Palestinians, but if they won't deal, if they simply want to obstruct, it's time to move on.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Fred Fleitz. Great to speak to you.
Okay, good to be here. Thank you.
Now, in other news, the US President Donald Trump has received some criticism for his decision to pardon the nearly 1,600 people convicted for their varying roles in the 6th of January attacks on the US Capitol. Well, one of those criticizing this decision is the Senator Lindsey Graham, a longtime ally of President Trump, who said that the move could send out the wrong signal. Well, some of those who received pardon included people who assaulted police officers during the course of the riots. Well, for more, we can speak now to Pam Hemphill, the so-called former MAGA granny, who has actually refused President Trump's pardon. Pam, you join us from Idaho. Great to have you with us. Let me just ask you, first of all, why did you refuse the pardon?
Well, I've been speaking out against Trump for about a year and a half, and I already said I wouldn't take a pardon if he ever offered one. But mainly it's because it would be a slap in the face to the police officers, you know, to our rule of law, to our nation. It was an insurrection that day. I was part of that. I pleaded guilty because I was guilty, and I need to finish my sentence. It's part of my amends for ever being there that day.
In legal terms, what's that therefore meant for you, refusing a pardon?
Well, I just have to complete my probation, and that's about it for me right now.
Sounds like you're you're extremely remorseful and regretful of having been there in the first place.
Oh, yeah, not knowing that it was a big lie, that the election had not been stolen. People around Trump told him it wasn't stolen. He went out there and lied about it anyway. And then I end up in prison, relying on him and all his enablers, believing that they're out there telling us the truth, and they're lying. And so I pay a heavy price for it.
Must have been really hard going to prison. I won't reveal your age on air, but it's hard to go to prison at any age. But how did you manage?
Oh, it was very difficult. I just heard, though, that Joseph Biden pardoned the lady, Michelle West, that was there. And if it weren't for her, I wouldn't be here. She said she really helped make sure I was safe in prison.
How did she do that?
By telling the other girls to leave me alone. She kind of had some clout. She was a beautiful black Muslim lady. She would come over and say, "That's her channel. Give her back that TV button." She would just keep an eye on me because there were 95% cartel women in there, and they did not like Trump. And so they wanted to try to plant drugs in my room, and I could end up with another 4-year sentence, so she just made sure they knew to leave me alone.
Do you think any of the pardons that were issued were justified?
Oh, absolutely not. Not one. We broke the law that day. The Capitol was closed down to the public. No, this is gaslighting. They're trying to stay the victim. They're not a victim. They had a choice that day. They were volunteers.
Yeah, you've used this word gaslighting before. You've talked about a false narrative that surrounds what happened on the 6th of January. And there are people out there saying that there are attempts to kind of rewrite the history of the 6th of January. Sounds like you agree with that assessment. Who's rewriting it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We got eyes. We see the videos. How could you even think that it was peaceful? But they got to keep Trump's narrative going. And Trump's narrative is the DOJ is weaponized against him, which is not true. That's why I got upset and started speaking out, because they were using me to say the DOJ was weaponized against me. And I said, no, they're not. I pleaded guilty because I was guilty and I got due process. They go out there lying, saying they're not getting due process. And that's not true. You can just look up their court recordings. Every one of them are getting due process. Everything they put out there has been just an outright lie.
A lot of what you're telling me, and also the labels that are attached to you, describing you as a former Trump supporter, suggests that you've stopped supporting Donald Trump, perhaps some time ago. Why did you do that?
Oh, because I found out he was a dangerous narcissist. He's a cult leader. In fact, when he was just recently sworn in, it felt like we were swearing in a dictator or a mob boss, not a president. Just so many reasons. But I voted for Harris, and I've changed my party to Democrat.
So all of this said, what were you doing on the 6th of January? Why were you even in that neck of the woods?
Well, I had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and my family called me up and said, how would you like to go there? Because I videotape in Boise, Idaho, a lot of events. I'm not a citizen journalist, but I enjoy videotaping. So they gave me the trip as a Christmas gift, and I went there, and I got there too late. And I'm walking around, and I'm going, what's going on next? Because I couldn't hear Trump. They said Trump's going down to the Capitol. So I thought, I'll get there first. And but I went because I was kind of believing that the election had been stolen at that time.
And how did everything catch up with you? How did you get caught?
Well, when I was walking up to the Capitol, I ran into the Proud Boys, and I followed them for a while. But I was there's little bike racks, and William Dunphy started pushing on them, and they started pushing on the officers. I thought they were trying to get in too early, so an officer pulls me over, and I go walking around saying, "It's your house, come on in." And that's why I got in trouble. Plus, I was shoved inside the Capitol. So I was trespassing. I was charged with picketing and parading. I was guilty.
I mean, you sound so rational, and you're telling it in such a fair way, because you're saying exactly what you did, and you think you've been dealt fair justice by the justice system. I mean, what was going through your mind on the 6th of January 2021?
Just nothing really. I just wanted to hear the speakers, and hopefully I was hoping to go make it a vacation and see the White House. And I didn't even know the transfer of power was happening, but I was just overwhelmed with, it was such a large group of people. It was exciting. It was like going to Disneyland, you know.
Do you feel like you perhaps did you get a bit whipped up by the frenzy of it all, would you say?
Yeah, you feel like you're in a community of people that all are feeling the same, but you don't know about the disinformation warfare that was going on. I had no clue. You lose your critical thinking. You're listening to people with 2 PhDs, you know, Giuliani, all the people that surrounded Trump. Why would they be lying? They wouldn't be lying to the whole nation that the election was stolen, right? It doesn't come to you. But with Trump's gaslighting, when he says they're coming after me, but they're really coming after you, it scares people. And then all the propaganda that the Democrats wanted to turn this into a communist nation, that scares you. And then a layperson like me does not do any research. So I'm really upset at myself for just trusting people. But now I have found out that everything Trump has put out there is an absolute lie. Absolute.
I mean, clearly everyone was whipped up into a frenzy on the 6th of January. Perhaps there were other people like you who hadn't got a track record of attending events like that and getting involved in that sort of thing. Where do you think the rallying cry came from? Who motivated people to show up on the 6th of January and essentially invade the Capitol building?
What Trump did. I believe Trump had the plan, along with his Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and all the people around him. I think there was a plan ahead of time. And like he said, it's going to be wild, right? You know, so I think it started with Trump. And as I believe, he's a dictator, and he's waited 3 hours, and we all know that, to do something. I mean, I was thinking, why isn't he up here stopping this? Why isn't he saying something? Why did he wait 3 hours if he didn't like what was going on?
And did you go inside the Capitol building, or did you never get that close? Because you mentioned that you got stopped by police quite early on. Did you go inside?
Well, no, after the police officers, because I told them I had stitches, said to go to the steps. So I got to the steps, but they shoved me down. They broke my glasses, stepped on my head, cut my knee. I was a mess. I was a mess. The officers picked me up and saved my life that day. But I hung around, and that's where I was wrong, to videotape. I got in front of the door, and everybody starts shoving everybody in. So I sat down, and the Capitol police officer helped me get out. Because I said, I can't get around this crowd. They're crazy. They're pushing people like me down. So it was horrifying. The whole day was just a nightmare.
But I don't really understand why you're admitting so much guilt, because from what you're telling me, and you're being very honest and very frank, so I've got no reason to doubt what you're telling me, but you were there filming something that was happening, something important, and you didn't really have a prior motivation. You just found yourself sort of in the wrong place at the wrong time. So why do you think you're so guilty?
Because I had a choice. I'm not a victim of January 6th. I stayed. I could have left, so I broke the law. It's really that simple. The Capitol was not open to anybody, and anybody else trying to excuse what they did that day and blame the Capitol police officers and blame somebody else, the government. It's all, they're in denial. They don't want to face the consequences of what they did that day. So I'm not going to be a part of that. I have to work a spiritual program. I've been sober for 45 years now. I had to admit when I was wrong. And I was wrong that day. I was 100% wrong. Shouldn't have been there. It's the worst day of my life that I got to live with, that I was a part of that.
Okay. And just lastly, Pam, I have to ask you, they call you in the media the former MAGA granny. And I just want to ask you how you feel about that label.
Well, I leave the name because people, Tucker Carlson on Fox News had given me that name, so people know who I am. But I say ex-MAGA granny. So I don't know. We need a new name. Some people call me Pam Tifa now.
All right. Well, I'll call you Pam Hemphill because that is your name. And I'd like to say a very big thank you to you for speaking to us on Al Arabiya News.
Thank you.
Okay, for more, we can speak now to Brandon Stracke, who was one of the people who received a pardon from President Trump for his role on the 6th of January. He joins us now from New York. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Brandon. I just want to ask you, first of all, how did you feel when you first heard you'd been pardoned?
Oh, I felt overjoyed. I felt relieved. I mean, for me, I'd say the number one thing that made me feel relieved was that the pardon sort of unburdened me from being locked into my plea deal, which was untrue from top to bottom. So essentially, it sort of negated my plea deal and allowed me the freedom and opportunity to say openly that the contents of my plea deal were a lie.
Okay, so what was it that, I mean, you'll just have to explain to our viewers, what was it about the plea deal that made you think it was worth signing?
Well, because I've always said, for me, it was never a question of how do I win and how do I lose. When you're going up against the federal government, you're only going to lose. So it becomes a question of how do you lose the least? How do you get through a situation like that with as much of your life intact as possible when you come out the other side? And for me, taking a plea deal was really the only option because the government has gotten a 100% conviction rate on January 6th cases because they will only allow the jurisdiction for the cases to be heard in Washington, D.C. So this is a district that has voted 93% against Donald Trump. These people hate Donald Trump. They hate his supporters. And now you've taken these people and put them basically in a trap in these courtrooms where the jurors and the judges who are deciding their fate hate them and have this idea in their head that these people are violent insurrectionists, white supremacists, and all these things that they've been told. So for me, when the government arrested me, put me in jail, FBI raided my house in the most absurd and ridiculous fashion, I was initially facing 2 felonies and a misdemeanor. Then they threatened to add a 3rd felony. Or they said I could take a plea deal and all the felonies go away if I pled guilty to a Class B misdemeanor and signed their statement of offense, which was thoroughly false from top to bottom.
Let's go back to that day, the 6th of January 2021, a day that I think none of us will forget. And I was covering the event, albeit from a news studio. What were you doing there in D.C.? You're normally based in Omaha, in Nebraska. You traveled 2,000 kilometers from Omaha to D.C. What brought you there?
Well, normally I'm based out of New York City, and my time in Omaha was supposed to be temporary during the COVID pandemic. But I travel the country regularly. I've been doing this for now almost 7 years, leading a social political movement that I call #WalkAway campaign. We're the largest national movement of former Democrats walking away from the Democratic Party. And I was asked to be a speaker at a scheduled permitted event on Capitol grounds that day. So it was always supposed to be a march from the ellipse to the Capitol where there was a second stage with a permitted event. I was one of dozens of speakers scheduled to speak. And when I was arriving for my scheduled speaking engagement, I started getting messages on my phone telling me that from people who are watching on television around the country saying, we're hearing that something is happening and that people are going inside the building. And so I started shooting a video and I approached the Capitol from the east side, walked up to the building. Now, this is usually the point where most media stations start showing footage of the west side of the building and all the violence that was taking place. That was not my experience on the east side. If you actually watch my video and show my footage, what you'll see is thousands of people very calmly, peacefully standing outside of the Capitol. The barricades were fully open. There were no signs indicating people weren't allowed to be there. There were no police officers on the east side of the building telling people to leave or struggling with people. It was just a crowd of people standing outside of the building. And as I got close to the building, there was a man at the top of the steps who was shouting, "They've opened the doors. They're letting us in. We're going inside. We're going inside." So I walked up to the top of the east side of the steps. And when I got there, sure enough, the doors on the east side of the Capitol were open. There was a crowd of several hundred people at the top of the steps. Some of them were trying to push their way in. The majority, like me, were just standing outside shooting a video. So I never entered the Capitol on January 6th, never went inside. I didn't engage in any violence, vandalism, theft, or destruction. I didn't witness any violence, vandalism, theft, or destruction. What I witnessed was a crowd of people that perhaps at best one could describe as disorderly, some of them trying to push their way in. But after 8 minutes, a man came out of the building, got on a bullhorn and said, "They've cleared Congress, everyone left the building, move out." And I immediately turned around and walked down the stairs. And then I uploaded that video to Twitter. And 2.5 weeks later, the FBI raided my home and took me to jail.
I mean, from what you've sort of told us there, I mean, it doesn't sound like you did very much apart from stand there and film something, which...
I don't think I did anything.
Right, and filming something is allowed. So in your case, you didn't hurt anybody, you weren't an accessory to any violence, you didn't vandalize anything, you didn't steal anything. That's your case. What about some of the other cases where we did see people do those things? Do you think...
Well, let me say...
Do you think Donald Trump was right to pardon them?
I do, but before I answer that question, let me please say too, what I just described to you is an accurate depiction of my experience at the Capitol. However, when it came time for me to go to jail and be charged with felonies and end up taking a plea deal, because I didn't actually do anything, the FBI had to create a story that I did. And the best story that they could come up with was that I stood outside of the building shouting, "Go, go, go," to encourage people to enter the building. And that I stood outside of the building shouting, take it," to encourage the crowd of people to take a shield from an officer. I did not do these things. That was never true. However, it was a condition of my plea deal that I signed their statement of offense that said I did those things. So you will read that I confessed to doing those things. I want to say unequivocally, I did not do those things. They never happened. Nonetheless, it was a required part of my plea agreement to say that I did. And to answer your question about the others, I'll first of all say I don't condone violence. I don't condone destruction or vandalism. And I don't think that those things are okay. However, if you look historically, even over the last 10 years in the United States, we have seen numerous protests, even protest movements like the Black Lives Matter movement that went on and on and on for months, in which there was unbelievable violence and vandalism and destruction and harming of police officers to the point of people got killed. I mean, police officers were murdered in 2020. And none of these rioters in that instance or many others ever faced consequences like the January 6th defendants faced. And it wasn't just judicial consequences. Every single person, including myself, including people who weren't even accused of violence or destruction, we were all placed on terrorism watch lists. We were all placed on the TSA Quad S list, meaning we weren't able to get on an airplane without going through hours of screening. And then when we did get on the airplane, we were accompanied by armed air marshals. We were all permanently banned by banks, payment processors, email services, social media, and had our names and reputations destroyed in the media, referred to as violent insurrectionists, anarchists, white supremacists, and people who tried to overthrow the government. So when I look at what happened on that day, including things I don't approve of, like breaking windows or initiating violence with police officers, because many people were accused of violence who were only finding themselves in a defensive posture, I look at that and I say, I think that 4 years in prison and all of the collateral consequences that come with being associated with January 6th are more than enough, especially when you consider that this is the exact same behavior that other groups of people have engaged in our country in the past, and they face no consequences whatsoever. I think 4 years in federal prison and all of these consequences is more than enough for what happened on that day.
I mean, I think someone watching will say, okay, your situation is a little bit different from some of the other situations. I mean, it sounds to me like you were in the wrong place at very much the wrong time. And again, I was thinking to myself as you were telling me that, I mean, if there was no evidence of you doing the things you were accused of doing, and there were so many cameras there that day, the idea that you were shouting, go, 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 and all the rest of it, I mean, if there was no evidence of it, it does seem like an incredibly difficult charge for them to have attached to you. But that to one side, I mean, there's a huge symbolism, isn't there, to attacking the seat of democracy in the country that, you know, carries the flag for democracy and freedom for the rest of the world. And therefore, perhaps shouldn't it be surprising that the full weight of the law came down on anyone with literally any association with that day?
Well, I would argue with the premise that it was an attack on democracy or an attack on the seat of democracy. People went to January 6th because they wanted to protest an election that they believed that there was sufficient enough evidence to believe that it was not an authentic, valid election. And people wanted a forensic audit of the vote. I mean, that is the threat to democracy. When people can't believe in elections anymore, and not only can't believe in elections, but aren't even being given the sufficient evidence that they're asking for to be shown that there wasn't significant fraud in the election that would sway the outcome. That's the threat to democracy, and that's what got people so upset. And they went to January 6th to protest that. And when they got there, a number of things went wrong, including police officers shooting flashbangs at people who were standing peacefully, or shooting people in the face with rubber bullets, pushing people and hitting people with batons and tear gassing people. There was a lot of activity from the Capitol Police that agitated the crowd a lot before the crowd became so unruly that they started knocking down barricades and violence ensued. So the idea that there was this like preconceived plan to go to Washington, D.C. and try to overthrow the government with zip ties and pepper spray is a little over the top, I think. And I think that that people are really becoming hyperbolic about the narrative of what happened and why.
Yeah, it's really interesting because just before we spoke to you, Brandon, we were talking to Pam Hemphill, also known as the former MAGA granny, a label that was attached to her by Fox News. She has not accepted the pardon because she says, I was wrong, I deserve to be punished, I paid the price, and I don't want a pardon, and I don't want anything more to do with President Donald Trump and his party. What's your reaction when you hear someone like that saying those sorts of things?
Yeah, well, the media should really investigate Pam Hemphill and what she's really about. So I had the opportunity to interview Pam only a month or two ago, and I asked her several questions about the assertions she's been making about pleading guilty because she is guilty and refusing a plea deal. And I asked Pam, if you pled guilty because you actually believe you're guilty, why did you take a plea deal? Because you were charged initially with 4 or 5 different counts of committing crimes. And Pam is on camera on January 6th, encouraging people to go in the building, telling people, go in there, this is your house, this is your house. Well, she didn't plead guilty to the many charges that came against her. She took the easy way out by taking a plea deal. And then when I asked her, well, so was the government lying in those other charges that you didn't plead guilty to? And she said, well, I'm not really sure if they were lying or not. And I said, well, that's interesting because you keep telling everyone that the government didn't act corruptly on January 6th, that everybody who was charged because they were guilty. And yet she didn't actually plead guilty to the things that she was accused of. She took a plea deal to get out of the situation, just like so many other people did. But the really interesting thing about Pam is that she was really enjoying the attention she was receiving from being a conservative cable news personality when she was the MAGA granny. But as happens in any situation, the media cycle changes and people lose interest and they move on. When the conservative media lost interest in Pam, that's when all of a sudden Pam flipped and turned on Trump and turned on Pam was out there crusading for the Proud Boys. She was every single day. She was trying to be an advocate for the Proud Boys and say that the Proud Boys were being wronged until people stopped paying attention to her. And then the moment that she flipped, CNN started having her on all the time. The left-wing media took interest in her. And now Pam's all in against Trump and all in against the January 6ers. I promise you, when the left-wing media loses interest in Pam, she'll flip her story again. That's who Pam is.
Okay, well, of course, Pam isn't with us at this moment to answer to any of those comments. I just want to ask you lastly, Brandon, you're the founder of the Walk Away campaign. You've mentioned it already in this interview. It obviously encourages people to walk away from and abandon the Democratic Party. How do you feel to have President Trump back in the White House?
I think like so many people, we're feeling like it's a new dawn, it's a new day, that, you know, America is finally under the watch of a president that actually cares about putting the American people first, putting our economy first, making America truly great again. And he has been on fire in just the first week in office. An unbelievable amount of executive orders, and including a lot of border security, which is so important to so many people. The deportations, which is really important to a lot of people, and keeping his promise to the J6ers and initiating a body to investigate January 6th, a new committee. I think that people are feeling relieved once again. And I truly believe that America is about to enter a new golden age under President Trump. And I'll say one more thing too. Not only do I believe we're about to enter into a new golden age under President Trump, but I think that all of the resistance that we saw in his first term, I think it's going to begin to erode and chip away, because more and more people every day are realizing that they can't trust the mainstream media, that they've been lied to, and everything that they've been told about Donald Trump in an effort to control the way that they think and the way they feel and the way that they vote. People are getting wise to what the media has done to manipulate them. And I think that there is a great opportunity here for the next 4 years to be 4 years of great unification in our country and a lot of patriotism and rallying behind this great new America that's being created under Donald Trump.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for your time, Brendan Strack. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, less than a week into President Donald Trump's second administration, he has once again declared that he is, quote, taking back the Panama Canal, and that's sparking fears that he might attempt to do so by military force. Well, President Trump claims that China is operating the canal, but employees there insist that it is 100% run by Panamanians. Well, for more, we can speak now to Barbara Stevenson, former U.S. ambassador to Panama under President Barack Obama, who joins us now from North Carolina. Ambassador, great to have you with us. I should add, you also served as U.S. ambassador to London. Now, of course, today we're going to be talking about events in Panama specifically. Is Donald Trump serious about taking back control of the Panama Canal?
There's a bee in his bonnet. I think we can all see that. Now, exactly what he is on about and what he plans to do, I think, is a subject of a lot of discussion in Washington and certainly in our hemisphere. You know, I can certainly imagine a shipper of liquefied natural gas, which goes from our Gulf ports through the Panama Canal to Asia in about the course of a month, being alarmed in the 2023 and 2024 when the shipping tolls went up dramatically. And the answer to why that happened is that there was a severe drought in Panama, and it's not a flat canal like Suez. It's a canal where the ships have to be lifted through locks with fresh water, taken across the high part of the middle of the country, drop down, and then that fresh water goes out to the ocean with each passage. So it uses a lot of water to transit the ships through. And normally about 32 ships go through a day, but 36, 38, but it dropped to 22 back during the drought. And so on top of the tolls, there was an auction system to auction off the remaining slots, and that caused tolls to go up, doubling and even more. So did someone get the president's ear and say we're being price gouged on shipping LNG through the canal? That's a possibility. Another possibility I was reminded of by Fareed Zakaria, host of Global Public Square on CNN yesterday morning. He reminded us that when President Trump visited Panama in 2017 and met with then President Juan Carlos Varela, that he raised with him then that he didn't believe that the U.S. Navy should have to pay a toll to go through the Panama Canal. The whole, not a high toll, it's a reduced toll. U.S. ships get, front of the line privileges. But the president was arguing, we're paying too much. It was a total of $1 million a year for all of our Navy ships. So it could be, he's a deal maker. So exactly what is in there is still being sorted out. There's a third part to this that I want to add. The canal is not controlled by the Chinese. It is controlled by the Panama Canal Authority. The ports and the other infrastructure around the canal, the Pacific end, the Atlantic end, three other pieces of critical infrastructure, they are in Chinese hands, and we now, years after international bidding processes to let these go, in which the U.S. lost out to the Chinese state-owned enterprises in certainly the Panama on the Pacific coast, we see that this does give China leverage, and it does have some national security significance. That same president, Juan Carlos Varela, in 2017, surprised U.S. officials, including my successor, Ambassador John Feely, with 1 hour's notice that instead of recognizing Taiwan, Panama was going to recognize China. So not the canal itself, but that infrastructure has been raised as an issue. And so there might very well be something there that needs to be looked at.
Okay, Ambassador, you raised lots of important points. I'll try to pick up all of them. Firstly, concerns about, therefore, Chinese influence near the waterway. You're saying that they're not entirely without justification.
So the Commander-in-Chief of Southern Command, which oversees, that's her part of the world, she testified to Congress in 2023 that these 5 pieces of critical infrastructure were cause for concern. So that's not a new idea. And there is a generalized concern that actually President Trump's new national security advisor, Mike Waltz, spoke about, which is China's growing influence throughout Latin America. And he stated an intent of the Trump administration to really pay more attention to Latin America in order to counter this rising Chinese influence. But let's be clear, it is not so surprised that China, which runs its economy on exports, has made a worldwide investment in port infrastructure. It's Peru, it's Panama, it's Piraeus, and it's all kinds of other places that don't start with a P. But we've been following this in the Belt and Road Initiative for some years. Panama is an instant case of how China with state-owned enterprises outbids often.
Okay, so one of the things you said in your opening statement is that this could all be a negotiating tactic, or you alluded to the fact that, as some analysts are suggesting, this could be President Trump's negotiating technique to bring people to the table, to start the discussion, to put the idea out there. You also mentioned the former U.S. ambassador to Panama, John Feely, and one of the things he's been saying is that it would, quote, take military force to take back control of the Panama Canal. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that, and I just want to ask, could it really come to that?
So I don't see a scenario in which Panama would, quote, give back the canal. I just do not. It is an issue of paramount importance to the Panamanians. Sovereignty over the canal is a deeply held conviction in Panamanians' hearts. But I'm going to draw a contrast. When I went down as ambassador, I remember in my Senate confirmation hearing citing America's approval rating in Panama. 84% of Panamanians had a positive impression of the United States. And it's still one of the places where there's the most pro-American sentiment. And if one of the goals of the administration is to help counter Chinese sway and reestablish America in, the hearts, minds, and business practices of our neighbors to the south, this is costly. I guess that's one of the things I would say. Now, would it take military force? I can't see another way. It depends on whether the president really wants to control the Panama Canal or whether he's after something else. He does need Panama to really play ball the way Mexico has and help with the migrant flow, which comes through Panama through the Darien Gap. It's hard to say whether there's an ulterior motive. There does seem to be a very real recurring theme in the president's mind that we pay too much to transit the canal. Now, the drought is over. Transits are up to normal. The auction process has been, put to the side. So, that part of paying a lot has really, it's not an ongoing issue. We don't know, I think, precisely what the president is after, and his aims in some ways seem not all pointing in the same direction.
Okay, so maybe there will be some preferential rates given to the United States. I don't know if you think that's a possible outcome of all of this, or whether you think perhaps already, now that that bidding process for transit in the Panama Canal has ended, that President Trump has got something to show the American people and say, well, in fact, we were being ripped off, but we're not anymore. Could that be something he then shows to the American people?
I think a very good staffer could give him those points, and they would then look valid when you went to the business pages, but without knowing quite what he's after, because as you know, if you read that part of the speech, it was a sweeping President McKinley, homage, and it was about, it's still kind of hard to say as an American diplomat because we haven't talked about this since I was a school child, but it was a manifest destiny expanding empire speech. It's not just Panama, it's also Greenland. There's other, and then, planting the flag on Mars, which is, a kind of a John F. Kennedy idea. So we were in new space. We have not really talked about territorial acquisition as a goal in such a long time that you have to reach way back into a previous century to find precedents for us speaking this way. That is a possible aspiration. I don't think we know fully. But I think I agree with John. It is hard to imagine. So can a deal be made short of military force? Yes. Do we really intend to take back the Panama Canal? I'm sorry I brought it back up again because I find it to be a topic that's unhelpful to discuss for America's larger interests, given, flags have been burned at the U.S. Embassy and at the ambassador's residence, the kind of thing that just hasn't happened in a long time. So it has definitely provoked a very negative reaction among Panamanians. And it is worth remembering that when the U.S. negotiated the Panama Canal treaties in 1977, a major reason for doing that was that our Department of Defense had concluded that opposition, not only in Panama, but really throughout the hemisphere, was so strong to the U.S. having this colonial presence in Panama that the canal was almost indefensible under U.S. ownership. If the U.S. had our flag over it. Panama, though, doesn't really have many enemies. They make it a point not to be that kind of a country. They survive. Their whole economic model is because people pass through there. So it became not a military challenge. But when the U.S. is actually in charge of it, when we were in charge of it in the 70s, the Pentagon had concluded it was largely indefensible with an American flag flying over it.
Yeah, and of course, debate about the Panama Canal and its return to Panama, obviously reignited by the passing of President Jimmy Carter last month. And I just want to ask you, you first served in Panama right at the beginning of your career in the mid-1980s. Did you imagine that here we'd be 40 years later discussing whether or not control of the Panama Canal should be taken back by Washington?
So when I went there in 1986 and I served on the Joint Commission on the Environment, which was to keep the watershed healthy so there'd be plenty of water and no silting up, the U.S. and Panama were in a prolonged process that went from 1977 to the end of 1999 of building up Panamanian management and then leadership of the canal for a handoff. And the raw feelings from the vote on the Panama Canal Treaty, which was close, it was just a vote or two in favor. Many of the people who voted for it were never elected to any office again because the opposition was so strong. It wasn't that hard to imagine that this was going to remain a contentious political issue for the United States back in the mid-'80s. But by the time we get to now, it's been like right at 25 years since Panama has taken over running the canal, It's run smoothly. I remember in my opening remarks when I arrived in Panama, I said, no, it doesn't matter how you measure it. What you guys have done with the canal has been a big success, whether it's number of transits, transit times, the safety record. They were all a really improved record. But what Panama did that the U.S. didn't do, when the U.S. ran it, we ran it as a utility on a break-even basis. Panama funds 25-30% of its budget from the government budget from canal tolls. So the cost of a transit went up, but it's not in Panama's interest, having invested more than $5 billion in these big new locks that take the much larger vessels through. It's not in their interest to charge so much that shippers decide to choose another route. They need it to hit that point where this is the most cost-effective way to get your goods delivered. So I think in the long run, we've got a drought that ended. We've got Panamanians looking at an additional water reservoir to add in case there's drought again. The tolls have gone down. The U.S. Navy ships get preferential treatment. Would Panama agree to even more preferential treatment? I don't know. But it's, I think we will come to something far short of military force.
Okay, so we've talked about how... Okay, we've talked about how some optimistic analysts are saying that perhaps this is all a negotiating tactic, and it might even end up having the effect of strengthening U.S.-Panamanian ties. There are also some cynics out there. Senator Chris Murphy calling the seizure of Greenland and taking back control of the Panama Canal as being a distraction from bigger issues like inflation. He called this, quote, catnip. I wonder if you agree with his assessment.
I do think this is a crowd pleaser for the Republican base. Giving back the canal was a very contentious issue. I have a wonderful book called Drawing the Line at the Big Ditch, and it just details the political cost. And Republicans, you know, this was done by a Democratic president who's just been rehabilitated. And really seen as one of our great presidents in the long run. And, you know, for night after night, we did watch the footage of President Carter signing the agreement with, you know, President Torrijos to hand it over. So it is a bit of catnip and it is a bit of a distraction. And I think Chris Murphy's a really smart guy. I'm going to entertain his theory.
I'd just like to ask you about U.S. foreign policy and how it's shaping up under President Trump overall. We've got Secretary of State Marco Rubio making his first visit in his new capacity to Central America. He's going to be going to a number of places, including Panama. And he is, of course, the first Hispanic and first fluent Spanish speaker in that particular role. What sort of a welcome do you think they're likely to give him at this stage? I mean, this trip could happen as soon as next week or this coming week. What sort of a welcome do you think he'll get there in Panama?
So, you know, it's a really exceptional relationship the U.S. has with Panama, and we often use family terms to describe it. And the Panamanians used to say, you know, with this relationship, no hay divorcio. You know, you can never be divorced. And then, you know, as time went on, we did sort of leave. But it tends to be both very close and familial, but then big blazing rows sometimes. And we feel like we might be in a big blazing row moment with this, these repeated statements from the president that, you know, Panama is not running the canal, the Chinese are. So it could be a rocky visit.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, of course, President Jose Raul Mulino is a big, strong U.S. ally. I mean, a staunch ally, and as you say, the whole country's been allied to the United States and looked at in sort of familial terms. But I mean, do you think there is a danger here? The United States has been, under Donald Trump, stoking a couple of strong allies. This isn't the first such example. I mean, do you think there's a danger that the United States is really going to get a lot of backs up unnecessarily on the international stage?
I am really worried about that, and I wanted to be positive in this interview, but after Colombia, which has routinely been accepting deportation flights, rejected military flights with Colombians handcuffed on the flight and said, you know, we want them delivered on a civilian plane, we'll give you one. We've had quite the morning here of closing the visa section in the embassy in Bogota. and imposition or the announcement of imposition of 25% tariffs with Colombia, which is a country we have a free trade agreement with, as we do with Panama. So it's been a rocky time, and I can't quite see the logic of this. I really want to come back to what the National Security Advisor talked about, which is that, you know, he said the president is very focused on the Western Hemisphere these days. And so some of these things that I've gone on for multiple administrations, but he talked about, you know, looking at the Western Hemisphere really as a source of energy, critical minerals, the food supply we absolutely need. So partnership is kind of what we were after when I was there. That was actually our official talking points, from paternalism to partnership. And it's languished. It's languished, and China has actually very much grown in sway in Latin America. I think that part is absolutely indisputable. How we win Latin America back, I am one who believes that wolf warrior diplomacy has cost China dearly. And I just don't think that the U.S. adopting that posture with Latin America is likely to play out any differently.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, but really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Ambassador Barbara Stevenson, thank you again.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.
Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Osaka. There's just so much to learn, see, and do. Osaka has a population of about 2.5 million. Often, Osaka is considered the anti-capital of Japan, where Tokyo is its capital. It is the central metropolis of the Kansai region, and the largest of the Osaka, Kobe, Kyoto trio. However way you regard the city, there are many opportunities for you to discover it. Enter the city and you'll immediately get a feel of its commercial-centric vibe. To be able to tour around it better, know how the city is divided into 24 wards. There's Kita, the newer center of the city. Umeda is where the main terminal is located. You'll find the huge department stores and boutiques there, as well as theaters for entertainment. Just look for the shops clustered around the JR Osaka Station and Umeda Station. Namba is the main railway station, also surrounded with department stores and endless places for shopping. Meanwhile, Minami is the traditional commercial and cultural center of Osaka. It is further broken down into two wards, Chuo and Naniwa. Shinsaibashi and Hori are the fashion wards, while Dotonbori is the best place for eating and dining. Semba is where you will find the business districts of Yodoyabashi, Duojima, and Homachi, as well as the financial district of Kitahama. Tennoji is the area around the main subway stations and rail lines. The ward was named after the historical Shitennoji Temple. You'll also find the zoo and the park here, as well as the Tsutenkaku Tower. Then there's the Shinsekai, known as the amusement area in the old days. Of course, there's the Osaka Castle, one of the most visited tourist attractions in Japan. Kyobashi nearby is where you will find the Osaka Business Park. The north includes the Shin, Osaka, and Juso wards, while the east houses Osaka's suburbs. The southern suburbs of Osaka, containing various districts, which has the Sumiyoshi Taisha Grand Shrine. And finally, the Bay Area is where you'll see the gigantic facilities.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,